Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The last night in the city. Have you ever felt like the world around you is shifting in ways you can't quite understand? That strange, elusive sensation where something is watching, just beyond your field of vision, waiting? That was my reality during the last night I spent in the city. A city that had always been alive, pulsing with light and energy, was now a hollow shell, haunted by the ghosts of its past. I remember it vividly, as though it happened only yesterday. It was an evening like any other at first, though there was an eerie stillness in the air, as if the city was holding its breath. The streets, usually teeming with people and cars, felt oddly empty. The shadows stretched longer than usual, twisting around buildings and spilling into alleyways, darkening the spaces between streetlights. And then, as if the sky itself had turned against us, the eclipse began. The sun dimmed, casting the city in an unnatural twilight. People gathered to watch the strange phenomenon, cameras ready to capture the celestial event. But as the moon began to swallow the sun, a sense of dread crept into my chest. I should have known then. I should have listened to that primal part of me that whispered warnings, but instead, I stayed fascinated, frozen in place, as the world around me grew darker. By the time the eclipse was total, the city was submerged in an unnatural night. No stars in the sky. No moonlight. Just darkness, thick and oppressive, like a shroud thrown over everything. The city, once a bustling metropolis, became a void, a place where light no longer reached. And with the darkness came the silence, a silence so deep it felt like the world had ceased to exist. I was alone. Everyone else had either disappeared or found shelter. I couldn't see a soul, and the once familiar streets felt alien, as though they had transformed into something out of a nightmare. I could feel eyes on me, thousands of them, but when I turned, there was nothing. Just the shadows, shifting, moving, as though they had come to life. The air felt colder now, biting at my skin. My phone was useless, no signal, no light. I tried to call out, but my voice seemed to die before it left my lips, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I started walking, unsure of where I was going, just trying to find some sign of life, some proof that I wasn't entirely alone in this forsaken place. But as I moved deeper into the city, I began to notice them. At first, they were just fleeting glimpses, figures at the edges of my vision, ghosts, perhaps. Wisps of movement, like someone darting into the shadows just before I could see them. But the longer I walked, the clearer they became. Faces, pale and hollow, staring back at me from the darkened windows of abandoned buildings. Some smiled, others were twisted in agony. All of them watched. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the empty streets. I wanted to run, to get away from those faces, but no matter how fast I moved, they were always there, watching, waiting. I passed by shops that should have been closed hours ago, their windows reflecting the twisted city back at me. And in every reflection, I saw them, shapes that shouldn't have been there, moving in ways that defied logic. The memories started to flood back then, memories I had tried to bury. It wasn't just the city that was haunted, it was me. The shadows weren't just figments of my imagination. They were the ghosts of my past, the mistakes I had tried to forget. They had come for me, and now, In the dead of night, under a sky where the sun had vanished, there was nowhere left to hide. I don't know why I started hearing the whispers. They were faint at first, like the wind rustling through the trees, but soon they grew louder. They spoke my name over and over, in voices that were both familiar and foreign. The whispers came from the shadows, from the empty streets, from the hollow windows. And no matter how hard I tried to block them out, they followed me, growing louder, more insistent. I stumbled down a narrow alley, the walls closing in on me, the darkness pressing tighter around my chest. The whispers became voices now, angry, accusatory, demanding to be heard. And then I saw it. At the end of the alley, a mirror stood propped against the wall, tall and cracked, reflecting a version of myself I didn't recognize. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. The ghost stood behind me, their pale eyes staring into mine. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The air around me felt thick, heavy, as though it was dragging me down into the depths of my own mind. As I stared into the mirror, the faces behind me began to change. They were people I knew, people I had lost. Some were friends, others were enemies, all of them dead. And in their eyes, I saw the truth. I wasn't just haunted by the city, I was part of it now. Bound to it, just as they were. I turned to run, but it was too late. The city had claimed me. The darkness, the silence, the ghosts, they were all waiting for me, and there was no escape. I ran. I don't know how long or how far, but my legs carried me through the city's empty streets, weaving between the towering buildings that now felt like gravestones. The whispers followed, growing louder with every step, and the faces, those hollow eyes, seemed to appear in every window I passed. Their gaze burned into my back, urging me forward, as if they were hunting me, driving me deeper into the city's belly. The cold gnawed at my skin, but the fear was worse, spreading like a fire in my chest. Every shadow I passed felt alive, curling toward me, reaching with unseen hands. I didn't stop, not even when my lungs screamed for air, not when my legs threatened to buckle. I couldn't stop. Something was out there, something was coming for me, and if I stopped, I knew I would never escape. I turned down a familiar street, but it didn't feel familiar anymore. The buildings seemed to twist and shift, like the city itself was playing tricks on me. The streetlights flickered, casting eerie, flickering patterns on the pavement. The darkness felt alive, pressing closer and closer, tightening its grip around me. Ahead, I saw it, a small cafe, its windows dark, but the door was open, slightly ajar, beckoning. Without thinking, I sprinted toward it, the whispers growing into a roar in my ears. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I slammed the door shut behind me, pressing my back against it, gasping for breath. The cafe was cold, its air stale, as if it hadn't seen a customer in years. Chairs were overturned, tables scattered. The soft hum of an old refrigerator buzzed from behind the counter, but there were no lights, no movement, just me, standing in the dark, trembling. I peered through the grimy windows, but the street outside was empty, save for the shifting shadows that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I took a step forward, then another, moving cautiously through the cafe, my hands brushing against the cold surfaces of tables and counters. Something about this place felt familiar, like a memory just out of reach. It was comforting in a way, a small island of safety in a sea of madness. But then, I saw it again, another mirror. This one was cracked, just like the one in the alley, its surface warped and stained, but it was unmistakable. My reflection stared back at me, though the person in the glass wasn't quite me. There was something off about my face, something twisted. The shadows behind me swirled, and for a split second, I thought I saw the faint outlines of figures moving in the reflection. The ghosts, the shadows, they were still with me. I stepped back, my pulse racing. The reflection smiled at me, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down my spine. I blinked, and the smile was gone, replaced by my own terrified face. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, but I wasn't sure if I was asking the mirror or the shadows. The answer came in a voice that wasn't mine, echoing from the depths of the cafe. "You know why." I spun around, but there was no one there, just the overturned chairs and broken tables. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. I backed away from the mirror, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "You can't hide," the voice whispered again, closer now, as if it was coming from inside my own head. "You brought this on yourself." I shook my head, trying to silence the voice, but it only grew louder, the words blending with the whispers from outside. I stumbled toward the back of the cafe, searching for an exit, a way out. My hand found a door, cold and heavy, and I pushed it open, spilling out into the alley behind the cafe. The air hit me like a slap, cold and damp. The alley was narrow, lined with towering walls of brick that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing, but the voice pushed me forward. I ran again, my footsteps echoing off the walls as I plunged deeper into the maze of alleys and side streets. The city felt like a labyrinth now, its streets twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. But no matter how fast I ran, the shadows followed. I could feel them now, close behind, creeping along the walls, crawling over the ground like living things. The voices, the whispers, they were in my head, filling my mind with thoughts that weren't my own. "You can't escape," they said, over and over. "You belong to us." I turned a corner, and suddenly, I was back on the main street, standing in front of the tall buildings that loomed over me like silent sentinels. The streetlights flickered again, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to reach for me. I stopped, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time since the eclipse began, I allowed myself to really look around. The city was completely still. Not a single car, not a single person. Just me, standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by the darkness. And then I saw them, standing at the far end of the street, barely visible in the dim light. The figures. Dozens of them, their pale faces shining in the darkness, their hollow eyes fixed on me. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. They just stood there, waiting, watching. I took a step back, my mind racing. There was nowhere left to run. The city had become a prison, and I was trapped inside, surrounded by the shadows of my own past. I looked back at the figures, my heart pounding in my chest. They were closer now, though I hadn't seen them move. Closer, and yet still completely still. My breath hitched. The darkness was swallowing the city whole, and with it, everything I had ever known. The eclipse wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was something more. Something darker. And I was at the center of it. The figures drew closer with each heartbeat. They moved in silence, without footsteps, gliding toward me as if they were part of the shadows themselves. My chest tightened with fear, but I couldn't turn away. My legs, which had carried me through the darkened streets, now felt like lead. I was frozen, pinned under their gaze. Their faces became clearer the closer they came. They weren't just anyone, they were people I knew. Friends. family, even the ones I had only crossed paths with briefly in my life. But they were twisted versions of themselves, drained of color and life, their eyes wide and empty, their mouths frozen in expressions of silent agony. And each one of them was staring at me, accusing, demanding. A part of me wanted to scream, to call out for help, but what good would it do? There was no one left in this city. The eclipse had swallowed everything, turning the world into this haunted void, a place where the past refused to stay buried. I forced myself to move, stumbling backward as the figures closed the distance. I had to escape. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. But where? Every street I had run down was either a dead end or led me deeper into the maze of alleys. The city had turned on me, twisting itself into something unrecognizable. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the cold air burning my lungs. Behind me, I could feel them, the ghosts of my past, pursuing me, closing in. Their presence weighed heavy on me, like a suffocating fog, dragging me down with every step. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to keep moving. The streets blurred as I ran, the buildings twisting into grotesque shapes, the streetlights flickering and dimming until they disappeared entirely. Soon, I was running in complete darkness, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the distant whispers of the ghosts. I turned a corner and saw a faint light in the distance. It was small, flickering, like the last ember of a dying fire, but it was enough to give me hope. Maybe there was someone else out there, someone who hadn't been swallowed by the darkness. Maybe I wasn't completely alone. I ran toward the light, my legs trembling with exhaustion, my body aching with cold. As I drew closer, I realized it was coming from a single building, an old apartment complex that seemed to have been untouched by the decay that had overtaken the rest of the city. The windows were dark, but one room on the top floor glowed with a faint, warm light. I hesitated at the entrance, staring up at the building. Something about it felt wrong. It was too still, too quiet, like the air around it had been drained of life. But I didn't have a choice. The figures were still behind me, their presence closing in, their whispers growing louder. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the walls yellowed with age, and the air smelled of dust and mildew. An old elevator stood in the corner, its metal doors rusted and creaking as they struggled to close. I pressed the button for the top floor, my hands trembling. The elevator groaned to life, rattling and shuddering as it climbed the floors. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what I was hoping to find at the top. Safety? Answers? Maybe just someone else, anyone, who could explain what was happening. The elevator stopped with a jolt, and the doors slid open. The hallway was narrow and dim, the floor creaking beneath my feet as I stepped out. I followed the light, moving toward the one door that stood slightly ajar, the warm glow spilling out into the cold, dark hallway. I reached the door and pushed it open. The room was small, a single bedroom with faded wallpaper and old furniture. The light came from a flickering lamp on the nightstand. But what drew my attention wasn't the light, it was the figures sitting on the bed, their back turned to me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse. The figure didn't move. They sat perfectly still, their head bowed, their hands resting in their lap. Something about them felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The figure finally stirred, their head lifting slightly, but they didn't turn to face me. Instead, they spoke, their voice soft, almost a whisper. "You should have left when you had the chance." My blood ran cold. The voice, my voice. It was as if I were speaking to myself. I took another step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. What is this? What's happening? The figure stood, their movements slow and deliberate. As they turned to face me, my breath caught in my throat. It was me, standing there in front of me, but not quite. Their eyes were dark, hollow, their face gaunt and pale. They smiled, a slow, eerie smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You've been running for a long time," the figure said, their voice echoing in the small room. "But you can't outrun what you've done." I stumbled back, my mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the figure stepped closer, their eyes locked on mine, their smile widening. "You've always known it would end like this," they whispered. "You've always known the shadows would catch up to you." I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the floor as I fled the room, the hallway stretching endlessly in front of me. The whispers were everywhere now, louder, clearer. They weren't just voices anymore, they were memories. Every mistake I had ever made, every wrong I had tried to forget, echoed in the darkness, chasing me down. I burst through the door at the end of the hallway, stumbling out onto the rooftop. The cold night air hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I ran to the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. The eclipse still hung in the sky, the darkness swallowing everything below. The streets were empty, the buildings silent. But I wasn't alone. The shadows were waiting, their eyes glinting in the darkness. They surrounded the building, their pale faces turned upward, watching me, waiting. And I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. Not from them. Not from the city. Not from myself. I stepped back from the edge, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure from the apartment stood behind me now, their smile still frozen on their face, their eyes dark and empty. "There's nowhere left to run," they whispered. "You belong to us now." I closed my eyes, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, suffocating, inescapable. The city, the shadows, the voices, they had all become one. And I was part of it. The cold pressed into me as I stood on the rooftop, the dark city stretching out below like an ocean of shadows. My doppelganger stood still behind me, watching, waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Maybe they were waiting for me to surrender, to finally give in to the truth I had been running from. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I looked over the edge again, my breath visible in the freezing air. The street below was still empty, the pale faces of the figures lingering in the shadows, their eyes trained on me. They weren't going to let me leave this place. This city had become a cage, and they were its keepers. The whispers in my mind grew louder, the voices twisting into something darker, more insistent. "You can't escape. You never could." I backed away from the edge, my mind racing. There had to be a way out. There had to be something I could do to break free. But the figure, myself, stepped closer, cutting off any retreat. "There's no use fighting it," they said, their voice so calm, so certain. "You've been part of this place for longer than you realize." I shook my head, refusing to accept their words. "I don't belong here," I said, though my voice faltered. This isn't real." The smile never left their face. "Isn't it?" They stepped closer, and I felt the air around me grow colder, thicker, like it was choking the life out of me. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The city had twisted itself into something unrecognizable, and now I was trapped within its heart. "You can't run from yourself," the figure whispered, their voice wrapping around me like a noose. You can't run from the things you've done. I turned away from them, desperate to escape, and my eyes landed on a metal fire escape at the side of the building. It was old, rusted, barely hanging on, but it was something, a way out. Without thinking, I bolted toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure's laughter echoed behind me, but I didn't stop. I grabbed the cold metal railing and swung myself over the edge, my feet slipping on the icy steps as I descended. The fire escape groaned under my weight, and for a moment I thought it would collapse, sending me plummeting into the darkness below. But it held. I climbed down as fast as I could, the metal creaking with every movement, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The shadows below shifted, swirling like black smoke, as if they were waiting for me. But I couldn't stop now. I had to keep moving, had to find a way out of this nightmare. Finally, I reached the bottom, my feet hitting the wet pavement with a dull thud. I glanced up at the rooftop, but the figure was gone. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, I had escaped. But the street around me was not the same as it had been before. The buildings loomed higher, their windows like empty eyes, watching my every move. The whispers were still there, louder now, pressing in from all sides. I walked forward, my body tense, every step feeling heavier than the last. The pale faces in the shadows followed me with their gaze, their eyes glinting with something I couldn't name, anger, sadness, maybe both. But they didn't move. They were waiting for something. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the street, bathed in the faint glow of a single streetlight. At first, I thought it was one of the ghosts, one of the silent watchers that had been stalking me since the eclipse began. But as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't like the others. It was him. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the man standing in the light. He was older now, his hair grayer, his face lined with age, but there was no mistaking him. I knew this man. I had known him once, long ago. He didn't move as I approached, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes fixed on me. The weight of his gaze was suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the world, leaving only the two of us standing there in the dark. I stopped a few feet away from him, my heart pounding. "It's you," I whispered, but I wasn't sure if I was speaking to him or to myself. He nodded, his expression calm, though there was a sadness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "It's been a long time," he said softly, his voice low and steady. I swallowed hard, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. But none of them came out. Instead, I asked the one thing that had been gnawing at me since the eclipse began. "What is this place?" He sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the question. "This city, it's not just a place. It's a memory. A reflection of everything you've buried. Everything you've tried to forget." I shook my head, my thoughts spiraling. "That doesn't make any sense. This isn't real. It can't be real." The man looked at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. "It's real, in its own way. As real as the things you've run from." I took a step back, my chest tightening. "I don't understand. Why are you here? Why now?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because you called me." "I didn't." "Yes, you did," he interrupted, his voice firmer now. "Maybe not with words, but with your fear. With your guilt. You've been running for so long, trying to escape your own shadow. But shadows have a way of catching up." I felt the weight of his words, like a stone sinking in my chest. The truth I had been avoiding, the memories I had pushed down, all came rushing back. I had run from this moment for years, hoping that if I ran far enough, I could leave it all behind. But the shadows had followed me, waiting, biding their time. And now, they were here. The man took a step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's time to stop running," he said softly. "It's time to face what you've done." I opened my mouth to protest, to deny his words, but the truth was already there, hanging between us. The eclipse, the shadows, the city, they were all reflections of my past, echoes of the things I had tried to bury. And now, they were demanding to be faced. I lowered my head, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I don't know if I can." The man's expression softened. "You can," he said, "but you have to stop running." I closed my eyes, the whispers in my mind growing louder, more insistent. They were my own thoughts now, my own fears, my own regrets, all swirling together into one cacophony of guilt and sorrow. And for the first time in years, I felt something lift from my chest. The weight of guilt, the crushing burden of my past, began to ease. It wasn't gone, but it was lighter now. Manageable. I turned back toward the chair, but my father was gone. The room was empty now, silent, peaceful. I wasn't free, not yet, but I had taken the first step. The light lingered as I stood in the empty room, its glow soft and warm, a stark contrast to the cold, suffocating darkness I had just emerged from. The house around me seemed to breathe again, its walls no longer closing in, the shadows that had haunted me now mere remnants of what they had once been. But the weight of the past still clung to me, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. I knew what I had to do. I had to leave this place. For good. I turned and walked toward the door, my steps slow but steady. The light followed me, casting long shadows along the walls, but they no longer felt menacing. They were just shadows, nothing more. The ghosts of the past had done their worst, and now they were fading. As I stepped out into the hallway, the air seemed lighter, fresher. The oppressive silence that had hung over the house was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness that felt almost peaceful. I walked through the house, my eyes lingering on the old furniture, the faded wallpaper, the dust-covered floors. This place had once been my home, but now it was nothing more than a shell. A memory. I reached the front door and hesitated, my hand resting on the cold doorknob. For a moment, I considered turning back, walking through the house one last time. But I knew there was nothing left for me here. The past was behind me now. It was time to move forward. I opened the door and stepped outside. The city greeted me with an eerie calm. The eclipse was still hanging overhead, its dark circle casting long, distorted shadows across the empty streets. But the fear that had gripped me earlier was gone. The city no longer felt like a maze designed to trap me. It was just a place, an empty, forgotten place. I began walking, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The streetlights flickered, casting their weak glow across the pavement, but I no longer cared about the shadows they created. I was done with shadows. The city seemed to shift around me as I walked, the buildings growing taller, the streets winding and twisting in ways that didn't quite make sense. But I didn't stop. I knew where I was going now. I wasn't lost anymore. The streets led me to the edge of the city, where the tall buildings gave way to empty fields stretching out into the distance. The sky above was a deep, velvety black, the eclipse still holding the moon hostage. But there, on the horizon, I could see a faint light, a sunrise waiting to break through the darkness. I stood there for a moment, watching the light grow stronger, brighter. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long was finally lifting. The memories that had haunted me, the guilt that had twisted itself into my very bones, it was all fading now, dissolving into the darkness. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs. And then, I heard it. A whisper. Faint, but unmistakable. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The city behind me was still and quiet, the shadows long and deep. But there, standing in the middle of the street, was a figure. Her. I hadn't seen her in years, hadn't allowed myself to even think about her. But now, here she was, standing in the pale light of the street lamps, her face hidden in shadow. My breath caught in my throat, my legs trembling as I took a step forward. Emily, I whispered, my voice breaking. She didn't move, didn't speak. But I could feel her presence, as real as the cold air around me. The memories came flooding back, memories I had buried even deeper than the ones of my father. The guilt, the regret, the things I had done, or hadn't done. The things that had led to this moment. I took another step toward her, my chest tight with emotion. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely audible. I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean for things to end like this. Her silence was deafening, her stillness unnerving. I wanted to reach out, to touch her, to somehow make things right. But I knew I couldn't. The past couldn't be undone. The things I had done, the things I had failed to do, they couldn't be erased. I should have been there, I whispered, my voice trembling. I should have saved you. The air around me grew colder, the shadows pressing in again, but this time I didn't feel fear. I felt only sorrow, deep, aching sorrow for the life I had lost, for the person I had failed to be. Emily didn't move, didn't acknowledge my words. But I didn't need her to. I wasn't speaking to her anymore. I was speaking to the part of myself that had been trapped in that moment for so long, the part of me that had never been able to move on. The light on the horizon grew brighter, the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness. The eclipse was ending, the moon slowly moving away from the sun's light. And with it, the shadows around me began to fade, dissolving into the air like smoke. I turned away from Emily, my heart heavy but lighter than it had been in years. The city behind me was disappearing, the buildings melting into the darkness, leaving only the open fields and the light of the rising sun. I took one last look at the place I had called home, the place where my past had held me captive for so long. And then, I walked toward the light. The sun rose slowly, casting its warm glow across the empty fields. The shadows were gone now, the darkness retreating with the night. And for the first time in years, I felt free. As I walked, the memories of the city, of my father, of Emily, they all began to fade, like a dream slipping away in the morning light. I wasn't running from them anymore. I had faced them. And now, I could move on. The sun was fully up now, its light bright and golden, chasing away the last remnants of the eclipse. The sky above was clear, the air fresh and clean. I breathed deeply, feeling the warmth on my skin, the weight lifting from my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what lay ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The city, the shadows, the eclipse, they were behind me now. And I was ready to move forward. Stranger on the train. I boarded the train in the late afternoon, the kind of day where the sunlight flickered through the clouds like a distant memory. I found a seat by the window, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels soothing my mind. As the train began to move, I watched the scenery change from the bustling cityscape to the serene countryside. Trees whizzed by, and I felt a familiar sense of isolation envelop me, one that had become a constant companion in my life. The carriage was mostly empty, save for a few other passengers scattered about, each absorbed in their own worlds. I reached for my book, hoping to lose myself in its pages, but an unsettling feeling tugged at my consciousness. It was as if someone was watching me. I glanced up and noticed a man sitting across the aisle. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with unkempt hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. He was dressed in a worn-out coat, and I could see the lines of worry etched deeply into his face. "Are you always this lost in thought?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. I hesitated before responding, unsure if he was addressing me or merely talking to himself. "I suppose so. It's easy to get lost when traveling," I replied cautiously. He smiled faintly, but there was something unsettling in his expression. "You have a lot on your mind, don't you? Secrets that weigh you down." His words sent a chill down my spine. Who was this stranger, and how could he possibly know that I felt burdened? I shook my head, trying to dismiss his comment. "I'm just tired. Traveling can be exhausting." The man leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as if he were studying me. "Tired of running, perhaps? Or maybe just tired of being alone?" A knot formed in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. "I'm not running from anything," I asserted, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" He leaned back in his seat, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more serious. "I've seen you before. In dreams, maybe. But we will meet again. In another world." His words echoed in my mind, and I laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "I think you're mistaken. I don't believe in those kinds of things." He smirked, but his eyes held a depth that made me uneasy. "It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of fate. You're more connected to this world than you realize." The train rattled as it approached a tunnel, and the lights flickered. I glanced out the window, my heart racing. For a brief moment, the world outside was swallowed in darkness, and I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. When the light returned, I turned back to the stranger, but he was staring at the seat across from him, a faraway look in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't respond. Instead, he looked back at me, a strange intensity in his gaze. Sometimes, the world has a way of bringing people together for a reason. You should pay attention to the signs. I felt trapped in his stare, as if I were being pulled into a deeper conversation I wasn't ready for. The weight of his words pressed heavily on my chest. "What signs?" I managed to ask. He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of warmth. "The ones that tell you to be cautious. To look over your shoulder. To remember that not everything is as it seems." The train jolted, and I gripped the edge of my seat, trying to ground myself. My instincts screamed at me to move, to escape this unnerving conversation. I glanced around the carriage, searching for a distraction, but everyone else seemed oblivious to our exchange. I took a deep breath, summoning the courage to ask, "Are you trying to scare me?" The stranger leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm trying to warn you. You don't know what's coming." As the words hung in the air, a sudden sense of urgency surged within me. I needed to get away, to distance myself from this stranger who seemed to know too much. But before I could act, the train lurched again, and the lights flickered once more. I glanced at him, my heart pounding. Then, he smiled, a hauntingly beautiful smile that sent shivers down my spine. "We will meet again. I promise you that." The train sped on, carrying us toward an uncertain destination, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a web of fate I couldn't escape. I turned back to the window, trying to refocus my mind on the passing scenery, but the lush fields and distant hills blurred into a fog of anxiety. What had I just experienced? It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie rather than a real conversation. I couldn't help but glance back at the stranger. He was now looking out of the window, but his reflection caught my eye, a flicker of something dark, something unsettling. The train began to slow as it approached a station, and I felt a rush of relief wash over me. I needed to stretch my legs, to breathe fresh air, to escape the oppressive weight of his gaze. As the train came to a halt, I stood up quickly, gathering my things. The man didn't seem to notice my urgency. He was still lost in thought, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his thigh. I stepped off the train and into the cool evening air, the sound of the whistle echoing behind me. The platform was quiet, and I felt a momentary sense of freedom. I took a deep breath, inhaling the earthy scent of the approaching twilight. I wandered away from the train, searching for a bench where I could sit and collect my thoughts. But a nagging feeling pulled at my mind. I could still sense him behind me, a shadow lingering just out of sight. I dared not look back, fearing that the moment I did, he would be standing there, watching me with those penetrating blue eyes. Instead, I focused on the other passengers around me, trying to blend in and shake off the lingering dread. As I sat down on a bench, I took out my phone, scrolling through messages to distract myself. But I felt restless, my thoughts constantly drifting back to the stranger's words. "We will meet again." What did that even mean? My rational mind dismissed it as nonsense, yet a part of me couldn't let go of the unsettling sense of fate that hung in the air. After a few minutes, I decided it was time to reboard the train. I stood up, but before I could take a step, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned slowly, and there he was, the stranger, standing at the edge of the platform, watching me with that unnerving smile. My heart raced. "How did you?" "I told you, we're connected," he interrupted, his voice calm and steady. "You can't escape what you don't understand." I swallowed hard, my instincts urging me to flee, but my feet felt glued to the ground. "I don't want to talk to you," I said, attempting to sound firmer than I felt. "Running away won't change what's coming," he replied, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're in danger, and it's only a matter of time before it finds you." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't know me." He stepped closer, the distance between us evaporating. "That's where you're wrong. I know you better than anyone else. I see the darkness that surrounds you, the secrets you hold." I took a step back, shaking my head in disbelief. "I don't have any secrets. You're just a stranger." His expression shifted, the warm smile fading into a stern gaze. "Not for long. You'll learn soon enough that everything has a purpose, and every meaning is a piece of a larger puzzle." A train whistle pierced the air, and I felt a rush of panic. I needed to get away from him, to escape this nightmare. I turned abruptly, heading back toward the train, but I could feel him following me, his presence looming like a storm cloud. As I boarded, I took a seat far from him, hoping the distance would quell the rising tide of fear. The train pulled away, leaving the station behind. I tried to focus on the passing landscape, but the unease remained, gnawing at my thoughts. I could see him in my peripheral vision, his eyes fixed on me as he settled into a seat across the aisle. I could feel my heart racing, the air growing heavy with tension. With every passing moment, it felt like the walls were closing in. I pulled out my book again, attempting to lose myself in its pages, but the words blurred together. Every time I glanced up, he was there, watching me. I could feel the heat of his gaze, and it set my nerves on edge. My thoughts spiraled into a dark place, filled with questions and uncertainty. What did he want from me? Why was he so insistent that we were connected? I closed my eyes, trying to drown out the noise in my mind. I needed to think clearly. As the train sped on, I felt an inexplicable connection to him, an awareness that something unexplainable was unfolding. And as much as I tried to convince myself that I could ignore it, I could sense that our paths were intertwined in a way I couldn't comprehend. With every mile, I could feel the tension building. I knew I would have to confront him again, face whatever darkness he was hinting at, and ultimately confront my own fears. As the train rumbled through the twilight, the light began to fade, casting shadows across the carriage. I tried to immerse myself in the book, but the words felt like a foreign language. The stranger's presence loomed in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that I was not alone, that something was about to happen. I glanced up again, and this time, our eyes met. His gaze was unwavering, and for a moment, the world around us fell silent. It was as if we were the only two people left on the train. The other passengers faded into the background, their conversations muffled like the sound of waves crashing against the shore. "Why are you staring at me?" I finally asked, unable to hold back any longer. His lips curled into a small smile. "Because I can see the fear in your eyes. You can pretend all you want, but deep down, you know something isn't right." "What do you mean?" I felt a mix of anger and fear, but I couldn't look away. "What do you know about me?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know about the moments when you feel most vulnerable, the times when you think no one is watching. Those are the moments that matter." "What are you talking about?" I repeated, my heart pounding. "The secrets you hide, the loneliness you carry. They create a kind of darkness that draws in unwanted attention," he explained, his tone unnervingly calm. "I'm here to warn you, not to frighten you." I shifted in my seat, feeling a mix of unease and curiosity. "Warn me about what?" He paused, scanning the other passengers as if searching for something or someone. "About the things that come when you're alone. The things that prey on your fears." A chill raced down my spine. "You're scaring me," I said, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. "I don't mean to," he replied, his voice softening. "But you need to understand that you're not as safe as you think. I can help you, but you have to trust me." "Trust you? Why would I do that? I don't even know you." I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "You'll know me soon enough," he replied cryptically, his gaze penetrating. "But time is short. You have to be aware of your surroundings. There are forces at play that you can't see." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. "This is insane. You're just some guy I train." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'm also someone who's been through this before. I know what you're feeling, and I know how it ends if you ignore the signs." I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "And what if I don't believe you? What if you're just trying to scare me?" "Then you'll have to find out for yourself," he said, his tone serious. But mark my words, this isn't just a coincidence. You and I are tied together by something beyond our understanding. There's a reason we met. The train began to slow again, the whistle echoing through the carriage. My heart raced as I glanced out the window, searching for any signs of familiarity. I could feel the tension mounting, as if the very air around us was charged with anticipation. As we pulled into the station, I felt an urgent need to get away. I stood up abruptly, gathering my belongings with shaky hands. The doors opened with a hiss, and I stepped onto the platform, grateful for the fresh air. But he followed, stepping off the train with an ease that sent a wave of panic through me. "You can't run from this," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not over yet." I turned away from him, my heart pounding in my chest. I hurried away from the platform, the lights of the station flickering in the dusk. I could feel his presence behind me, a shadow that wouldn't let go. No matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right there, just out of sight. I found myself in a small waiting area where a few scattered benches lined the walls. The atmosphere felt thick and oppressive, as if the very air was waiting for something to happen. I took a seat and glanced around, trying to find comfort in my surroundings, but my gaze kept drifting back to the entrance. The doors opened again, and I tensed. It was him, stepping into the room, his expression unreadable. I quickly looked away, my heart racing. I didn't want to engage, didn't want to feel the weight of his gaze any longer. "Why are you following me?" I finally blurted out, trying to sound assertive despite my trembling hands. "Because you need someone to guide you," he replied, his voice steady. "You're in more danger than you realize." I shook my head, disbelief flooding my senses. "I don't need your help. I'm fine." "Are you?" he challenged. "If you were truly fine, you wouldn't feel this way. You wouldn't be looking over your shoulder, expecting the worst." I wanted to argue, to deny his claims, but deep down, I felt the truth of his words. The sensation of being watched, of being hunted, had become a part of my life. I had ignored it for too long, convinced it was just paranoia. But now, standing here with this man, I realized that perhaps I had been wrong. "I just want to be left alone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't be alone in this," he insisted. "You have to face it. You can't ignore the signs forever." "Stop saying that," I shouted, frustration bubbling over. "What signs? What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "The darkness is coming for you. It feeds on fear, and you've been feeding it for too long. You need to be prepared." "What do you want me to do?" I asked, feeling tears of anger and frustration prick at my eyes. "Stay vigilant," he replied, his tone suddenly urgent. "When it comes, don't run. Face it. Embrace the fear, and you'll find the strength you never knew you had." His words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but a small part of me knew he was serious. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, and I had to confront it, one way or another. As I stood there, the train's whistle echoed in the distance, a reminder of the journey I couldn't escape. I glanced back at him, uncertainty swirling in my mind. "Will I see you again?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he said, his expression softening. "When the time is right." And just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the station. I stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle into my chest. I was left with a choice, to continue running or to confront the darkness that loomed ahead. As the night deepened, I felt a growing sense of dread wash over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the true test was yet to come. I needed to be ready, whatever that might mean. The train station was nearly deserted as night fell, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the platform. I lingered there for a moment, processing the strange encounter with the man. He had left me with more questions than answers, and I felt a growing sense of dread crawling under my skin. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to leave the waiting area and stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet, with only the sound of distant traffic echoing in the background. I glanced around, half expecting to see the stranger lurking in the shadows, but he was gone. I pulled my coat tighter around me, trying to shake off the lingering unease. As I walked toward the bus stop, the streetlights cast long shadows, and every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. I tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of my footsteps, but my mind kept drifting back to his words, "The darkness is coming for you." The bus arrived, and I climbed aboard, grateful for the distraction. I found a seat at the back and sat down, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The bus lurched forward, and I watched the city lights flicker past the window, their glow offering a fleeting sense of comfort. But my mind was restless. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I glanced at the reflection in the window, I half expected to see the stranger's face staring back at me. I needed to calm down, to reassure myself that everything was normal. I opened my book again, but the words swam before my eyes, refusing to settle into meaning. By the time I arrived at my stop, I felt drained. The cool air hit me as I stepped off the bus, and I made my way toward my apartment building, the familiar path offering a small sense of relief. As I approached the entrance, I noticed something unusual, a shadow moving near the edge of the parking lot. I stopped, my heart pounding. It was probably just a stray cat or a trick of the light, but I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me. I took a deep breath and moved closer, peering into the darkness. My eyes strained to adjust, but I saw nothing. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. I forced myself to continue walking, reminding myself that I was just tired from the day's events. Once inside my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, feeling the familiar walls offer a small measure of safety. I flicked on the lights and took a moment to gather my thoughts. The place felt still, too quiet, and I tried to brush away the nagging fear that something was wrong. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, the cool liquid refreshing against my parched throat. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned to the living room, my heart racing at the thought of seeing the stranger sitting on my couch, waiting for me. But there was no one. The room was empty, just the way I left it. I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I decided to settle down for the night, hoping sleep would wash away the remnants of the day. I turned on my favorite show, letting the familiar characters fill the silence. But as the hours passed, the unease crept back, curling around my mind like smoke. I finally made my way to bed, the sheets cool against my skin. As I lay there, I felt a growing sense of restlessness. Sleep eluded me, and I tossed and turned, the shadows in my room dancing in the dim light. Around midnight, I heard a faint sound, a soft tapping, almost like a whisper. My heart raced as I strained to listen. It was coming from the living room. I sat up, my breath quickening. What was that? I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if someone was actually in my apartment. I hesitated, fear gripping me, but the sound came again, a gentle tapping, like someone knocking lightly on the wall. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, the dim light illuminating the dark room. I texted a friend, my fingers shaking as I typed, "Can you call me? I think something's wrong." No response. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stand, every instinct screaming at me to stay put. The tapping continued, a rhythmic sound that felt unnervingly familiar. I steeled myself and tiptoed toward the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the doorway, I paused, the shadows shifting in the dim light. I peered around the corner, my breath caught in my throat. The room was empty, but the tapping persisted, echoing through the silence. I stepped further into the room, searching for the source of the noise. The curtains fluttered slightly as if a breeze had swept through, but the windows were closed. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a dark figure in the hallway leading to my bedroom. Panic surged through me, and I felt my heart race. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound brave. No answer. I felt frozen, my body unwilling to move as I squinted into the shadows. The figure shifted, almost merging with the darkness around it. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice shaking. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before returning. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I rushed to the hallway, but it was empty. The silence felt heavy, like a blanket wrapping around me. I stumbled back into the living room, heart racing as I tried to process what had just happened. It had to be a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, fueled by anxiety. I grabbed my phone again, desperately scrolling through my contacts. I needed someone to tell me I was just being paranoid. Before I could call anyone, I felt it, a chill creeping up my spine, a sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I glanced around the room, and that's when I saw it, a reflection in the glass of the framed picture hanging on the wall. It was him, the stranger, standing just outside my window, his piercing blue eyes fixed on me. I gasped, stumbling backward as panic surged through my veins. I turned to the window, but there was nothing there. The night was dark, the street empty. I was losing my mind. I stumbled back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I threw myself onto the bed, pulling the covers up over my head, heart pounding. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the events of the evening in my mind. Just a coincidence, I whispered to myself, trying to quell the rising tide of fear. But as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the darkness was watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. And deep down, I knew that the stranger's warning was far from over. The night dragged on, and despite my exhaustion, sleep remained a distant memory. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, set my heart racing. I felt trapped in my own mind, unable to escape the terrifying possibilities that danced in the shadows. Just as I began to drift off, I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand. I fumbled for it, my heart racing, and saw a text from my friend, Sarah. "Hey, I saw your message. What's up?" I quickly typed back, "I think someone's in my apartment. I don't know what's happening." There was a pause before she responded. "You're just tired. Try to relax. Is there a way I can come over?" I stared at her message, a mix of relief and frustration flooding through me. I desperately wanted her to come, but I also didn't want to drag anyone into my chaos. I replied, "No, I'll be fine." I just need to calm down. I placed my phone down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The words of the stranger echoed in my mind, a mantra of dread. You have to face it. Embrace the fear. But what did that even mean? I didn't want to face anything. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare. As the hours ticked by, the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. I felt a sense of exhaustion settle over me, my body finally succumbing to the weariness of the night. I closed my eyes, willing myself to find some rest. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep, my dreams were filled with swirling shadows and echoes of whispers, taunting me with their secrets. I woke with a start, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. It was already morning, and the sun poured into the room, chasing away the remnants of the night. I took a moment to gather myself, heart still racing, and made my way to the kitchen to brew some coffee. The aroma filled the air, offering a semblance of normalcy. As I sipped my coffee, I tried to shake off the lingering fear from the night before. Perhaps I was overreacting. After all, I was alone in the city, and it was easy to let my imagination run wild. But as the day wore on, the unease returned. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced out the window, scanning the street below for any sign of the stranger, but there was nothing. Just the typical bustle of city life. I decided to go for a walk, hoping fresh air would clear my mind. As I strolled through the neighborhood, I forced myself to focus on the sights and sounds around me, the chirping of birds, children playing in the park, and the laughter of people enjoying their morning. It should have felt comforting, but I felt like a stranger in my own skin. As I passed a local cafe, I spotted Sarah sitting at a table outside, her laptop open in front of her. She looked up and waved, and I felt a rush of gratitude. I made my way over, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over me. Hey, you look a bit rough, she remarked, her smile fading slightly as she took in my appearance. Everything okay? Not really, I admitted, sliding into the chair across from her. I had a weird night. I think I might be losing my mind. She raised an eyebrow. What happened? I hesitated, unsure of how to explain the strange encounter and the lingering sense of dread. But as I spoke, sharing the details of the stranger and the tapping sounds, I felt the weight of my fear begin to lift. Okay, that's definitely unsettling, Sarah said, her expression shifting from concern to curiosity. But it sounds like you might just be stressed. Maybe it was a dream? You know how vivid they can be when you're anxious. Maybe, I replied, but doubt gnawed at me. It felt too real. And what about the tapping? It was like someone was trying to get my attention. Did you check around your apartment? She asked, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. I didn't want to look. I was too freaked out. I felt a blush creep to my cheeks. I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy. You're dealing with a lot right now, she reassured me. But maybe you should go back home and just take a look. If nothing's there, you'll feel better. And if it helps, I can come with you. I appreciated her offer, but I felt a surge of embarrassment. No, I don't want to bother you. I'll be fine. I just need to face it. All right, she said, concern still evident in her eyes. Just remember, I'm a text away if you need me. And maybe just don't be alone for a while? Yeah, I'll keep that in mind, I replied, forcing a smile. After our conversation, I felt a bit lighter, but the shadows still loomed in the back of my mind. As we finished our coffee, I felt a strange pull to go home and confront whatever it was that haunted me. "Thanks for listening," I said as we stood up to leave. "I really appreciate it." "Anytime," she smiled, giving me a quick hug. "Just don't be a stranger, okay?" I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and dread as I walked away. I took a deep breath as I headed back to my apartment, trying to quell the unease that bubbled beneath the surface. The walk back felt longer than usual, each step echoing with the weight of anticipation. I unlocked the door, my heart racing as I stepped inside. The familiar surroundings felt different, as if the walls were watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I took a moment to breathe, reminding myself that I was just being paranoid. But as I scanned the room, I noticed something unsettling. The curtains were slightly ajar, as if someone had been peering inside. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Had I left them open? I couldn't remember. I approached the window cautiously, peering out into the street, but there was no one there. The world outside felt normal, but the unease clung to me like a shadow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped away from the window and began to check each room, determined to dispel the fear that hung in the air. As I moved through the apartment, I found nothing out of the ordinary, but the feeling of being watched remained. Finally, I made my way to the living room, and that's when I saw it, a small, folded piece of paper lying on the coffee table. My heart raced as I approached it, a knot forming in my stomach. I reached for it, my hands trembling as I unfolded the note. "You can't run. I'll find you." The words sent a wave of icy fear crashing over me, and I felt my heart drop. I glanced around the room, panic flooding my senses. Who had been in my apartment? I dropped the note as if it were on fire, stepping back in shock. My thoughts raced, scrambling for answers, but all I could feel was the overwhelming weight of dread. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that I was not safe. In that moment, I realized he had been right. The darkness was closing in, and I was running out of time. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the note on the table. "You can't run. I'll find you." The words felt like a taunt, echoing in my mind as panic coursed through me. Who had left this? How had they gotten into my apartment? I forced myself to breathe, trying to steady my racing heart. I needed to think clearly. The stranger had been in my mind all night, and now it felt as if he had breached the walls of my home, laying claim to my sanctuary. I scanned the room, searching for any sign of a break-in, but everything appeared untouched. The faint sounds of the city outside filled the silence, but inside my apartment, an oppressive stillness hung like a thick fog. I hesitated, caught between the urge to flee and the need to confront the fear head-on. I picked up the note again, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a prank, it felt personal, targeted. I had to find out more about this man. My thoughts flickered back to the night before, the unsettling presence of the stranger, his piercing blue eyes and that enigmatic smile. Maybe I could find some answers online. I moved quickly to my laptop and opened it, my fingers flying over the keys as I searched for any information about him. I typed in vague details: stranger on a train, mysterious man in the city, and unexplained encounters. For what felt like hours, I combed through forums and social media, but all I found were vague references to urban legends and ghost stories. I was losing hope when I stumbled upon a blog post discussing a similar encounter. The author described meeting a man who claimed to know things about him that no one else did. It ended with a chilling warning. He said I would meet him again in another life. I never saw him after that day, but I often wonder if he's watching me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't alone in this. Other people had encountered this man, too. My mind raced with possibilities. Was there a connection? Was this some sort of supernatural phenomenon? Just then, my phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "Hey, are you okay? I've been thinking about you." I took a moment to reply, fingers hovering over the screen. I couldn't burden her with the truth, not yet. I typed, "Yeah, just a bit overwhelmed. I'll be fine." I closed my laptop and looked around the apartment again, my sense of unease intensifying. I felt a compulsion to check the locks on the doors and windows, my hands moving automatically. Everything was secure, but the feeling of being watched was inescapable. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was time to face the truth. I needed to confront this fear, to find out who this stranger really was and what he wanted from me. I glanced at the clock, nearly evening. I couldn't let this consume me any longer. With determination, I decided to go back to the train station where it all began. Perhaps there would be answers waiting there. I got dressed, pulling on my coat and shoes. As I stepped outside, the air was cool, the sky tinged with the orange and pink hues of sunset. The street felt different somehow, charged, as if the world was holding its breath. The walk to the station felt shorter than before, each step echoing my resolve. I arrived and moved through the entrance, the familiar sights and sounds washing over me. The station was bustling, filled with people coming and going. I scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of the stranger, but there was nothing. I felt a mix of disappointment and relief as I approached the platform where we had first met. I leaned against a pillar, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I needed to gather my courage and stay alert. This was the place where it all began, and maybe it would be where I found answers. As I waited, I replayed our last conversation in my mind. What had he meant by "we will meet again in another world"? I felt a chill run through me. Suddenly, I noticed a commotion on the platform. A group of people had gathered around something or someone. Curiosity piqued, I moved closer, my heart pounding. As I pushed through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure, a man dressed in a long dark coat, his back turned to me. I felt a wave of recognition wash over me, and my breath caught in my throat. It was him. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to confront him. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, calling out, "Hey! You!" He turned slowly, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. That same unsettling smile played on his lips, and a shiver raced down my spine. "I wondered when you would come back. What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled softly, the sound sending chills through me. "You're more interesting than I thought. I wanted to help you see the truth." "The truth?" I echoed, my heart racing. "What truth?" He stepped closer, and the crowd around us seemed to fade away. "You're living in a bubble, a facade. There's so much more out there, if only you could see." I felt a mix of fear and anger. "Is this some kind of game to you? You're scaring me." His expression shifted, seriousness replacing the playful demeanor. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to show you. You think you can run, but you can't hide from what you really are." "What do you mean?" I asked, bewildered. He took another step closer, lowering his voice. "You're different, and you know it. This world isn't what it seems, and soon you'll understand. Before I could respond, the sound of a train approaching broke through the tension, and he stepped back, his smile returning. "You're not ready yet, but you will be. Just remember what I said." With that, he turned and walked away, melting into the crowd as the train doors opened. I felt paralyzed, confusion swirling in my mind. What had just happened? I wanted to follow him, to demand answers, but I stood frozen, overwhelmed. As the train doors closed and it pulled away, I felt a strange sense of loss. I had come looking for answers, but all I had found was more questions. The chill of uncertainty clung to me as I made my way back to the entrance, feeling the weight of the stranger's words settle deep in my chest. I was on the edge of something, but I didn't know what. The following days blurred into a haze of anxiety and confusion. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering between reality and the unknown. The encounter with the stranger had ignited something within me, a burning curiosity laced with fear. I tried to return to my routine, but it was impossible. Every creak of my apartment, every flicker of a shadow, sent my mind racing back to that man and his unsettling words. I found myself researching more about the supernatural, urban legends, and anything that could provide context to my experience. But instead of clarity, I found a tangled web of theories and conspiracies. It was both fascinating and terrifying. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through endless online forums. I came across a post titled "The Watcher." It described an entity that lurked in the shadows, observing people, claiming to know their deepest fears and secrets. The stories were often vague, but a common theme emerged. Those who encountered the Watcher felt a profound sense of dread and were often haunted by the experience. My heart raced as I read the tales of others who claimed to have crossed paths with this mysterious figure. It was as if they were speaking to my experience, echoing the stranger's warnings and cryptic messages. Was this what I had encountered? I thought, panic bubbling within me. The implications were too vast to comprehend. Over the next few days, I tried to push the thoughts aside, convincing myself that it was just a coincidence, that the stranger was merely a disturbed individual. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to suppress my fear, I felt his presence lurking just beyond my reach. One evening, as I prepared for bed, I noticed something unusual. The curtains, which I had closed tightly, were slightly parted. My stomach dropped as I remembered the sensation of being watched. I quickly rushed to the window and pulled them shut, blocking out the world. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, haunted by vivid nightmares. I saw the stranger's face, but it morphed into different people, friends, family, even strangers from the street. They all wore the same haunting smile, whispering my secrets back to me in a chorus of dread. When morning finally broke, I awoke drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I stumbled out of bed, feeling disoriented and weak. I needed to break this cycle, to regain control over my life. I decided to reach out to Sarah. Maybe talking to her could provide some much-needed perspective. I sent her a quick text. "Can we meet up? I really need to talk." Within minutes, she replied, "Of course. How about the cafe we went to last week?" I agreed and quickly got dressed, trying to shake off the remnants of the night's terror. As I walked to the cafe, the sun shining brightly overhead, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could find comfort in our conversation. When I arrived, Sarah was already seated at our usual table, her laptop open, but she looked up with concern as I approached. "Hey, you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" "I've been dealing with some stuff," I admitted, sliding into the chair opposite her. "Like what?" she asked, her voice steady, encouraging me to open up. I hesitated, unsure of how to articulate the overwhelming sense of dread I felt. You remember that guy I told you about? The one on the train? Her eyes widened slightly. Yeah, what about him? I've been having these thoughts. I think he might be something more. I keep seeing signs that make me think he's still watching me. Watching you, she echoed, her brow furrowing in concern. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, recounting my experiences, the note, the encounter, the feeling of being observed. As I spoke, I could see her concern grow. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality, I confessed, my voice trembling. Every little thing makes me jump. I don't know what's real anymore. Sarah leaned in, her expression serious. I get it. This sounds really intense. But you can't let him control your life. You're strong, and you can get through this. I wish I could believe that, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. What if he's not just some random guy? What if he's something supernatural? Okay, let's not jump to conclusions, she said, trying to maintain a level head. You need to focus on what you can control. Have you thought about talking to someone professional? Maybe a therapist? I shook my head. I can't. I don't want to sound crazy. You're not crazy for feeling this way. You've been through something traumatic. Talking about it could help. As I considered her words, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she was right. It was worth a shot. Okay, I'll think about it, I replied. We continued to chat, and as the conversation flowed, I felt some of the weight lift. But deep down, I knew this was just the calm before the storm. That evening, as I returned home, I noticed something odd. The door to my apartment was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped, and a cold sweat broke out over my skin. Had someone been in? I stepped inside cautiously, calling out, "Hello?" Silence echoed in response, but the air felt heavy, thick with tension. I scanned the room, feeling the familiar sensation of being watched. I approached the living room, and that's when I saw it. Another note lay on the coffee table, the same handwriting as before. You think you can escape? I am always here. Fear coursed through me as I gripped the edge of the table, my vision blurring with panic. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't ignore this any longer. I had to confront him. But as I stood there, rooted to the spot, I realized I had no idea how to find him. The chilling words of the note echoed in my mind, each letter a harbinger of dread. You think you can escape? I am always here. My heart raced as I crumpled the paper in my hand, feeling the weight of his gaze upon me, as if he were watching from the shadows of my apartment. I took a step back, trying to breathe through the fear, but it clung to me like a heavy shroud. I had been running from this for too long. It was time to confront the truth, whatever it may be. I considered my options. I could call the police, but would they take me seriously? A stranger on a train? A mysterious note? They would likely dismiss it as paranoia. No, I needed to do this on my own terms. I felt a surge of determination. I had to find this stranger, face him, and demand answers. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally reclaim my life from the grip of fear he held over me. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door, the cold night air hitting my face as I stepped onto the street. I could feel the pulse of the city around me, each heartbeat a reminder that I was still alive. My mind raced as I walked toward the train station, retracing my steps from the last encounter. It was familiar territory, and as I approached, I could feel the tension in my chest tighten. I needed to confront the stranger, but what would I say? "Why are you doing this to me?" seemed like a good place to start. I had to hold on to my courage. I couldn't show him fear. The station was bustling with activity. I navigated through the crowd, my eyes scanning for any sign of him. But as I reached the platform, my heart sank. There was no sign of the stranger, only the usual commuters rushing past, lost in their own worlds. Frustration bubbled within me. I had come here to confront him, but now it felt like I was chasing shadows. I leaned against a pillar, trying to collect my thoughts, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. What if he didn't show up? What if he was never going to come back? I was starting to question everything again, but just as I was about to turn away, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, his dark coat flowing like smoke. His blue eyes locked onto mine, and a smile spread across his face. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you want from me?" He took a step closer, and I felt my heart race in response. "I want to help you see the truth. You're special, and you have a gift." "A gift?" I scoffed, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You call this a gift? You've made my life a nightmare." He chuckled, unfazed by my outburst. "You don't understand yet. But you will." "Will I?" I shot back, frustration spilling over. "What does that even mean? Why do you keep watching me?" "I watch because I care," he replied, his tone turning serious. "The world is full of illusions, and you're trapped in one. But I can help you break free." My breath caught in my throat. Break free? From what? From the mundane, from the fear that holds you back. You're meant for more than this. More than what? I pressed, desperate for clarity. "What do you know about me?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "I know you're afraid, but it's time to embrace that fear. It's the key to unlocking your potential." "Fear isn't a key, it's a prison," I argued, feeling my voice rise. "You're just manipulating me." His expression darkened, and he pointed a finger at me, the air thick with tension. "You think this is manipulation? You don't understand the forces at play. You're fighting against something much larger than you realize." I felt a chill creep down my spine as I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of humanity, some shred of empathy. But all I saw was an intensity that was both captivating and terrifying. "Why should I trust you?" I demanded, trying to sound defiant despite the fear swirling inside me. "Because you don't have a choice," he replied, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You're already caught in the web, and I'm the only one who can help you navigate it." A tremor of uncertainty gripped me, and for a moment, I hesitated. Maybe there was truth in his words. Maybe I was caught in something beyond my comprehension. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing with me, using my fears against me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice echoing through the station. I turned to walk away, but he reached out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Don't run from this," he urged, his eyes boring into mine. "Embrace it. You need to understand what's happening before it's too late." I yanked my arm free, panic surging through me. "What do you mean by before it's too late?" But he didn't answer. Instead, his expression shifted, a hint of darkness creeping into his demeanor. "You'll see soon enough. The world is changing, and you're part of it, whether you like it or not." With that, he stepped back, fading into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. I stood there, heart racing, struggling to make sense of what had just transpired. The station felt alive with energy, but it was an energy that felt dangerous. I had to get out of there. I turned on my heel and rushed back into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. As I walked, my mind whirled with confusion and fear. What was happening to me? I reached my apartment and quickly locked the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. I felt trapped, ensnared in a reality that felt increasingly surreal. As I moved further into my apartment, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a reflection in the mirror. I turned, and for a moment, I thought I saw the stranger standing behind me, a shadowy figure with that same haunting smile. I gasped and spun around, but there was nothing. Just the stillness of my empty apartment. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum. I was losing my grip. I needed to find answers, to understand the truth behind the stranger and the darkness that seemed to be closing in around me. But just as I resolved to take action, I heard a soft knock at my door. My blood ran cold. Who could it be at this hour? I hesitated, my breath hitching in my throat. Should I open it? Or was it a trap? As I stood frozen in place, the knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Open up," a voice called out. My heart raced. It was Sarah. I rushed to the door, flinging it open to reveal her worried expression. "What happened?" "I was getting worried," she exclaimed, stepping inside. I don't know what's happening to me," I stammered, feeling a wave of relief wash over me at her presence. "The stranger, he's still watching me, and I don't know what to do." Sarah's expression softened as she took a step closer, her concern palpable. "We need to figure this out together. You're not alone in this." But as she spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was only just beginning to close in around us. A look from the floor. It all began on a night that felt like any other. I remember staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, the hum of the city outside barely audible through the thick glass of my window. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time in a way that felt almost mocking. I should have been asleep, but something gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, a whisper that hinted at something I couldn't quite grasp. I shifted in bed, pulling the covers tighter around me, but the chill in the air seemed to seep into my bones. It was an ordinary Tuesday, yet a strange feeling crept into my mind, a sense that I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, I lived alone, a choice I had made to escape the cacophony of crowded life, and loneliness was an ever-present companion. Still, as I glanced around my dimly lit room, a familiar tension coiled in my stomach. My apartment was sparsely furnished, decorated in muted tones that reflected my mood, a place meant for rest, but often felt like a tomb. The walls held echoes of laughter from friends who visited long ago, now replaced by a suffocating silence. It was easy to feel isolated in a space designed for solitude. That night, however, the silence was different. It felt heavy, as if the air itself was charged with something unseen. I could have sworn I heard a faint rustle coming from the corner of the room. My heart raced as I peered into the shadows, trying to discern whether it was merely the wind or something far more sinister. I strained my ears, convinced I could hear the soft scuffle of something moving, something that didn't belong. Get a grip, I whispered to myself, trying to sound more courageous than I felt. But my body betrayed me, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I forced my eyes to close, hoping that sleep would come and whisk me away from this uneasy feeling. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I felt an inexplicable urge to look again, to confront whatever lurked in the darkness. When I opened my eyes, the shadows had deepened. The corner of my room seemed to stretch and contort, forming shapes that danced just beyond the reach of the light. I could make out a figure, indistinct but undeniably present, hovering just above the floorboards. My breath hitched to my throat. The figure was dark, more like an absence of light than an actual shape. I blinked, half expecting it to vanish, but it remained, a dark sentinel watching from the edge of my perception. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to turn on the lights and banish the shadows, yet I felt frozen in place. Time itself seemed to warp as I stared at this anomaly. Was it a trick of the mind? Perhaps an after effect of too many late nights and too much solitude? My heart pounded, the sound echoing in my ears like a war drum. I mustered the courage to sit up and reach for my phone, thinking that a quick glance at the bright screen would dispel the shadows. But before I could act, the figure shifted. It seemed to rise, the darkness elongating and twisting like smoke swirling upward. A shiver ran down my spine as a deep sense of foreboding enveloped me. I felt the weight of something profound, a threat that was intangible yet undeniable. Then it happened. A whisper, barely audible, floated through the air, chilling me to the bone. Help me. I was paralyzed, torn between fear and curiosity. Who, or what, was asking for help? My mind raced, spinning theories, but deep down, I knew that this wasn't just my imagination. Something was wrong. With every passing moment, the figure loomed larger, more defined in my mind's eye, even if its true form remained hidden. It felt as if it had substance, a malevolence that seeped into the very fabric of my thoughts. I wanted to scream, to run, but all I could do was stare as it inched closer, reaching out with a dark hand, beckoning me to join it in whatever abyss it had emerged from. As the reality of my situation settled in, I finally found my voice, though it quivered with fear. Who are you? I demanded, but my voice sounded small and frail in the oppressive darkness. The figure hesitated, then continued its slow ascent, revealing more of its form, a shadow shaped like a person, yet entirely devoid of humanity. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat amplifying the terror coiling around me. I was utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. And that was only the beginning. The figure's presence was suffocating, the air around me thick with unspoken threats. It loomed ever closer, the edges of its form blurring and shifting as if it were made of smoke and shadows. I could hardly breathe, my chest tightening with each pulse of fear coursing through me. The whisper lingered in my mind, "Help me," echoing like a twisted lullaby. I willed myself to move, to leap from my bed and turn on the light, to banish this horror back into the realm of nightmares. But as I shifted slightly, the figure froze, its attention snapping to me with an intensity that felt almost tangible. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, trapped in a moment that stretched into eternity. "Please," I choked out, my voice barely a whisper, "what do you want?" The figure didn't respond, but a cold draft swept through the room, sending a chill down my spine. The shadows seemed to deepen, curling around the furniture like tendrils, wrapping me in their dark embrace. My instincts screamed at me to run, yet a morbid curiosity held me captive. What was this creature? Why was it here? For what felt like an eternity, we remained locked in this eerie standoff. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to resonate in the stillness of the night. Then, just as I thought I might lose my grip on reality, the figure lunged. It didn't advance in a way that a living being would. Instead, it glided across the floor, an unnatural motion that made my skin crawl. I gasped, scrambling backward, the bed frame digging into my back. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but I was paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, the light from my bedside lamp flickered, casting the room in a strobing glow that seemed to breathe life into the shadows. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of its face, or what I thought might be a face. It was a featureless mask, devoid of any human expression, yet I felt a wave of despair wash over me. "Help me!" The voice was clearer now, echoing in my mind rather than the room. It was filled with a sorrow that tugged at something deep within me. Was this thing once human? What had it endured to become this harbinger of dread? The questions clawed at my sanity, but I had no answers. I could only watch as the figure continued its ascent, seeming to rise from the floor as if defying gravity itself. The darkness enveloped my surroundings, swallowing the light until it felt like I was trapped in a void. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice trembling. But my plea was met with silence, and the figure loomed larger, engulfing the space around me. Panic surged through me, igniting a primal instinct to flee. I pushed myself off the bed, stumbling toward the door. As I reached for the handle, the temperature plummeted, and a powerful force slammed into me, sending me sprawling to the floor. My breath came in short gasps, the cold seeping into my bones. I lay there, disoriented, the figure hovering just inches above me. "Help me!" The plea resonated within me, a cry for salvation wrapped in malice. I could feel the tendrils of fear wrapping tighter around my heart, squeezing the air from my lungs. Was this a plea for help or a deceptive lure into something darker? Fighting against the fear that threatened to consume me, I mustered the last remnants of my courage. "What do you want?" I gasped, my voice cracking. With a sudden, jarring shift, the figure surged forward, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flash of clarity, a reflection of my own despair mirrored in its emptiness. But just as quickly, it vanished, leaving behind only the echo of its presence and the chilling whisper that had haunted me since it appeared. In that moment, I knew something had changed. The air felt charged with a malevolence that hadn't been there before, and I understood that my life would never be the same. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, determined to escape the room, to escape the darkness. But as I turned, I was met with the full force of that shadow once more. It was as if the darkness had become sentient, twisting around me, binding me to the floor. I fought against it, my heart pounding as I struggled to breathe. Then, as if sensing my resolve, it whispered again, this time with a tone that sent ice coursing through my veins. "Stay." A cold dread wrapped around me, and I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. In that moment, I realized that this figure was not just a manifestation of my fears, it was a harbinger of something much more sinister. With my pulse racing and panic rising, I knew I had to find a way to escape, not just the room, but whatever dark presence had decided to make my life its playground. The battle had just begun, and I had no idea how deep the shadows went. The chill of the air pressed against my skin as I finally wrenched myself free from the icy grip of fear. Heart racing, I bolted toward the door, desperate to escape the clutches of that dark figure. My mind screamed for clarity, but all I could focus on was the palpable sense of dread that lingered in the room like a thick fog. As I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal felt like ice beneath my trembling fingers. I hesitated, glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shadow lunging at me once more. But the corner of my room was empty now, cloaked in darkness, and I cursed myself for allowing fear to dictate my actions. I flung open the door and stumbled into the hallway, breathing in the stale air as if it were my salvation. The soft glow of the overhead lights flickered weakly, illuminating the familiar yet foreign space. My heart pounded loudly in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the world beyond. I leaned against the wall, taking a moment to collect myself, but the sense of urgency was relentless. What had I seen? Was it real? The questions gnawed at me as I made my way to the living room, seeking comfort in the familiar surroundings. Yet, the more I tried to rationalize what had happened, the more I felt a creeping doubt settle into my bones. Had I imagined the figure? Had the stress of living alone finally cracked my mind? My apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. The walls closed in on me, each shadow morphing into something sinister. I flicked on the lamp, bathing the room in warm light, hoping to banish the remnants of fear. But the shadows persisted, lurking just beyond the reach of the glow. I sank onto the couch, staring into the space where the figure had appeared. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just sleep deprivation or an overactive imagination. I tried to remind myself that I had lived in this apartment for years without incident. Yet, the memory of that dark shape haunted me, refusing to let go. I grabbed my phone, desperately scrolling through messages and news feeds, seeking a distraction. Maybe I just needed to talk to someone. But as I stared at the screen, the isolation of my reality pressed down on me. Friends had drifted away, life had taken us in different directions, and I was left with only my thoughts to keep me company. The darkness crept back, its tendrils curling around my mind. I glanced at the time, 1:30 in the morning. I needed to find some semblance of normalcy, something to ground me. I decided to make a cup of tea, hoping the warm liquid would provide comfort. As I moved toward the kitchen, I flicked on the overhead light, banishing some of the shadows that had taken residence in the corners. The kettle hissed as it heated, and I breathed deeply, trying to calm my racing heart. I could hear the faint hum of the city outside, a reminder that life continued on without me. I was lost in my thoughts when the kettle finally whistled. I poured the steaming water over the tea bag and let it steep, watching as the dark liquid swirled in the cup. The warmth of the mug seeped into my palms, and I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. But just as I was about to take a sip, I heard it again, the rustle, that unmistakable sound that had sent me fleeing before. My heart plummeted, and I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. The kitchen, bathed in light, felt suddenly ominous, every shadow a potential threat. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice trembling, the echo of fear creeping back into my throat. I knew the answer, yet the question lingered in the air, taunting me. Silence answered, thick and suffocating. I took a step back, instinctively moving toward the living room where I felt a semblance of safety. My mind raced with thoughts of locking the door, barricading myself from whatever was lurking in the shadows. But as I turned, I froze. The figure stood in the doorway, illuminated by the soft light of the kitchen. This time, it was more defined, an outline of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back, the mug slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. "Help me," it whispered again, its voice an echo of sorrow and despair that resonated deep within me. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions crash over me, fear, sympathy, confusion. What did it want? I wanted to run, to hide, yet I was rooted to the spot, captivated by the aura of desperation that surrounded it. "Please," I managed to stammer, my heart racing. "What do you need?" The figure seemed to hesitate, almost flickering in and out of existence as if it were struggling against the very fabric of reality. I could sense its frustration, its need for something I couldn't understand. "Help me," it said once more, this time with a hint of urgency. A cold sweat trickled down my back as I felt the weight of its plea settle on my shoulders. The shadows in my apartment had transformed from a figment of my imagination into something tangible, something that needed my attention. But what could I possibly do? I took a cautious step forward, feeling an irrational compulsion to help, despite the fear gnawing at me. "How can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaky yet filled with an unyielding determination. The figure shifted slightly, and I could almost feel its gaze boring into my soul, searching for something. I braced myself for the unknown, my instincts screaming at me to turn and flee, but I stood firm. There was a connection, a thread of understanding that woke between us, pulling me closer to the edge of the abyss. As I reached out a trembling hand, the room grew colder, the shadows deepening. I felt a pull, a gravity drawing me into the darkness, and for the first time, I understood the weight of its sorrow. I was no longer just an observer. I was entwined in a web of despair, and I had to make a choice, to turn away and protect myself or to step into the shadows and face whatever awaited me. I hesitated, my heart thundering in my chest as I reached out toward the figure. The air around us seemed to ripple with an electric charge, and I could feel the weight of its presence pressing against me, urging me to draw closer. "What do you want from me?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure shifted, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of something, maybe a memory, a glimpse of a life once lived. It was gone in an instant, leaving behind only the same suffocating darkness. The shadows writhed around it, twisting and contorting as if they had a will of their own. I could sense its desperation, a call for help wrapped in the haunting silence of the night. "Please," the plea resonated in the depths of my mind, pulling me deeper into its world of sorrow. "You must help me before it is too late." "Help you how?" I pressed, feeling both terrified and strangely compelled. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises and untold horrors. For a moment, the figure seemed to falter, its outline flickering like a candle fighting against the wind. "Find the truth," it said, its voice a mere echo of the despair that clung to it. "You must uncover what has been lost, before it consumes you." My breath hitched in my throat. What truth? And what would it cost me to uncover it? The shadows around me felt alive, twisting in response to my fear. I could almost hear the whispers of long-buried secrets calling out to me, taunting me with their darkness. My instincts screamed for me to turn back, to escape the ominous weight of the unknown, but there was an undeniable pull that kept me rooted in place. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to grasp the fragments of its message. "What have you lost?" In response, the figure raised its arm, pointing toward the hallway that led to the rest of my apartment. The gesture sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was directing me towards something far more sinister than I could comprehend. "Look," it urged, its voice barely above a whisper. "The truth lies beyond." I hesitated, glancing back at the safety of my kitchen, the bright light a stark contrast to the oppressive shadows enveloping me. Yet, curiosity battled with fear, and I found myself stepping forward, drawn to the promise of answers. As I approached the hallway, the air thickened, each step feeling like a journey into the abyss. The light from the kitchen dimmed behind me, swallowed by the encroaching darkness that loomed at the edge of my vision. My heart pounded as I reached the threshold, and the shadows seemed to ripple, beckoning me to continue. I walked down the hallway, each footfall muffled by an unnatural silence. My senses heightened, I scanned the walls for any signs of what the figure had hinted at. The apartment felt foreign, as if I were wandering through a dream twisted by nightmare. As I passed my bedroom door, I felt an inexplicable pull, the air around me growing colder. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I turned to find a mirror hanging on the wall, its surface darkened and cloudy. It felt out of place, as if it had been transported from another realm. I approached cautiously, peering into the glass. My reflection stared back, but it was distorted, the edges blurring and warping in a way that made my stomach churn. The darkness seemed to swirl behind me, and for a moment, I thought I saw the figure standing in the reflection, its presence lingering just out of sight. "Do you see?" it whispered, the voice echoing in my mind. "What you must confront." I felt the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, urging me to look closer. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch the mirror's surface, but the moment my fingers grazed the cool glass, an icy jolt shot through me. The reflection rippled, transforming into images, flashes of moments that felt hauntingly familiar yet undeniably foreign. There were glimpses of laughter, a child's voice echoing through the hallways, the warmth of sunlight filtering through the windows. But then the images darkened, turning to screams and shadows, memories twisted into something sinister. I recoiled, heart racing, but the figure's presence lingered in the air, relentless and heavy. "You must remember," it urged, desperation lacing its tone. "Uncover the past, before it is too late." Panic surged within me as the memories began to swirl, twisting together in a tempest of fear. I felt the ground beneath me shift, and I stumbled backward, struggling to regain my balance. The shadows writhed, closing in as the mirror pulsed with energy, drawing me closer to the depths of its secrets. "What are you?" I gasped, feeling the weight of the darkness threatening to consume me. "What happened here?" But the figure was silent, watching with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I felt lost in the depths of uncertainty, caught between the urge to flee and the need to uncover the truth. With a surge of determination, I forced myself to step closer to the mirror again, focusing on the swirling images. The child's laughter echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of innocence lost. I had to know what had happened, what connection this dark figure had to my life, to the memories that felt so achingly real. As I stared into the mirror, a single word echoed in my mind, a whisper of a name that felt both foreign and familiar: Sophia. The name sent a shiver through me, igniting a spark of recognition. Who was she? Why did her name resonate with such intensity? Before I could contemplate further, the figure surged forward, enveloping me in darkness. The room spun as I felt myself pulled into the mirror's depths, the shadows closing in around me like a shroud. "Find her," the figure urged, its voice a cacophony of sorrow and desperation. "Before it's too late." And with that, the darkness swallowed me whole. I felt myself falling, tumbling through a void where time and space lost all meaning. The darkness enveloped me, a cold blanket that seemed to sap the warmth from my skin. I gasped for breath, but the air felt thick and oppressive, swirling around me like a storm. Panic surged within me, clawing at my chest as I struggled to grasp reality. Then, suddenly, I landed with a jarring thud on a cold, hard surface. I blinked, disoriented, as my surroundings slowly came into focus. I was no longer in my apartment. I stood in a dimly lit room that felt both familiar and foreign, the air thick with an unsettling tension. The walls were lined with photographs, faces of people I didn't recognize but somehow felt a connection to. Each image was faded and torn, as if time had ravaged them, leaving behind mere fragments of memories. I stepped closer to examine them, a sense of dread curling in my stomach. One photograph caught my eye, a little girl with golden hair, a bright smile lighting up her face. She looked so innocent, so joyful. A name echoed in my mind, Sophia. My heart raced as I reached out, tracing my fingers along the edges of the photo. It was as if a part of me recognized her, a ghost of a memory whispering just out of reach. Find her, the figure's voice echoed in my mind, sending chills down my spine. I could feel the urgency behind its words, the weight of its plea pressing against my consciousness. But where was she? Where was I? The questions churned in my mind as I stepped deeper into the room, my senses heightened. I could hear the faint sound of whispers, the kind that faded in and out like a distant memory. I strained to listen, but the words eluded me, slipping through my grasp like smoke. As I turned, I noticed a doorway at the far end of the room, the frame shrouded in shadows. Something deep inside urged me to go through it. I felt a pull, a connection to whatever lay beyond that threshold. With a mix of fear and determination, I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering above the doorknob. What lay on the other side? Would it bring me closer to the truth or further into darkness? Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was bathed in a dim, eerie light. As I stepped inside, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest. The space felt vast, yet claustrophobic, filled with shadows that danced along the walls. It was as if I had stepped into a forgotten world, where time stood still. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, much like the one from my apartment. The surface was murky, reflecting only distorted shapes and shadows. My heart raced as I approached, an overwhelming sense of déjà vu washing over me. This was where the figure had directed me, the place where I might uncover the truth. As I gazed into the mirror, the shadows began to swirl and shift, coalescing into images. I watched, entranced, as scenes unfolded before me, a family gathered around a dinner table, laughter ringing through the air, the little girl with golden hair running through a sunlit garden. But as the images progressed, they grew darker. The laughter faded, replaced by arguments and tears. The warmth of the family turned to cold indifference, the joy slipping away like sand through fingers. I could see the little girl, Sophia, standing alone in the corner, her bright smile replaced by a look of confusion and fear. Help her, the figure's voice echoed in my mind again, more urgent this time. She needs you. I felt a surge of emotion, a mix of anger and sorrow for the child trapped within the confines of the mirror. I reached out, desperate to connect with her, to pull her from the shadows that threatened to consume her. Why? What happened to you? I cried out, my voice breaking in the silence. The mirror rippled, and suddenly, I was no longer an observer. I was thrust into the scene, the colors vibrant and overwhelming. I stood in the garden, the sun warm on my skin, surrounded by laughter. But it felt hollow, a facade masking the darkness lurking beneath. I turned to see Sophia, her innocent eyes wide with uncertainty. "Where is everyone?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. "Where did they go?" I asked, my heart aching for her. "I'll help you find them." But the scene began to shift, the brightness fading into darkness. The garden withered around us, the laughter replaced by the echoes of harsh words and silence. "No!" I shouted, reaching out to grab her hand, but the darkness swallowed us whole. Suddenly, I was back in the room with the mirror, gasping for breath as the whispers crescendoed around me. I stumbled back, heart racing as the shadows closed in. The figure loomed behind me, its presence heavier than before. "What is happening?" I demanded, fear clawing at my throat. What do you want from me? The figure's form flickered, the sorrow etched in its dark features. You must confront the pain, the truth hidden within these walls. Only then can you help her. The urgency in its voice cut through the haze of fear. I understood then that this journey was not just about uncovering the past. It was about facing the darkness within myself, the pain I had long buried. I had to confront the memories I had avoided, the truths I had ignored. Where do I start? I asked, determination igniting within me. The figure gestured toward the mirror, its outline shimmering with an otherworldly light. Dive into the depths. Find the heart of the darkness. Taking a deep breath, I approached the mirror once more. The surface rippled in anticipation, the whispers intensifying, urging me to step forward. I could feel the weight of Sophia's fear pressing down on me, and with that, I knew I couldn't turn back. I placed my hand on the glass, feeling it pulse beneath my touch. The shadows danced, swirling around me, and as I pushed through, I was engulfed in a whirlwind of memories. I fell into the abyss, knowing that to save Sophia, I had to face whatever darkness awaited me. The sensation of falling intensified as the memories engulfed me, swirling like a tempest. I felt my heart racing, a mixture of fear and resolve propelling me deeper into the shadows. I was no longer just an observer, I was part of the narrative, intertwined with the threads of the past. As the whirlwind of memories settled, I found myself standing in a dimly lit living room. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of decay hung in the atmosphere. It was a place I recognized, yet it felt foreign, shrouded in a veil of sorrow. The walls were lined with framed photographs, many of them cracked and fading, just like the memories they held. I walked toward one that caught my eye, a family portrait with a cheerful Sophia at its center, surrounded by her parents. Their smiles were wide, but there was something unsettling about their eyes, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. Suddenly, the room shifted, and I was transported back in time. I was a silent observer of a family dinner, laughter ringing through the air. The warmth of the moment felt tangible, but an undercurrent of tension lingered just out of sight. I watched as Sophia's parents exchanged glances that spoke of hidden fears and unspoken words. "Mom, can I go outside?" Sophia's voice broke through the laughter, sweet and innocent. "Not right now, sweetheart. Stay here with us," her mother replied, a hint of tension lacing her words. The scene faded, replaced by another, a darker memory. The laughter morphed into shouts, harsh and cutting. I felt the weight of their anger pressing against me, the air thick with frustration. I watched as Sophia's father stormed out of the room, his face twisted in rage, while her mother sat at the table, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why can't you see what this is doing to her?" she cried, her voice filled with anguish. I felt a pang of empathy for Sophia, who stood in the corner, her small frame trembling with confusion. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that it would be okay, but I was powerless to intervene. The memories continued to shift, revealing a pattern of neglect and pain. Each scene unfolded like a tragic play, the characters trapped in their roles, unable to break free from the cycle of darkness that surrounded them. I felt my heart ache for Sophia, who was caught in the crossfire of her parents' turmoil. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and I found myself back in the dim living room, the shadows closing in around me. The figure loomed in the corner, its presence more pronounced, its eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "You must help her," it urged, its voice a haunting echo in the silence. "You are the key to breaking this cycle." "How?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "I don't know how to help her." The figure's gaze was steady, its expression resolute. You must face the truth that lies within you. Only then can you reach her. With those words, I felt a surge of determination wash over me. I understood that my journey was not just about Sophia, it was about confronting my own fears, my own shadows. I had to unearth the pain I had buried deep within me if I wanted to help her find her way back to the light. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me again. I felt myself being pulled into another scene, this one dark and chaotic. I was in a different time and place, surrounded by the echoes of my own past, fragments of a life I had long tried to forget. I was a child again, standing in a dim hallway, the walls peeling and faded. I could hear raised voices from a room down the hall, filled with the sound of slamming doors and muffled shouts. My heart raced as I felt the familiar sense of dread creeping in. I remembered the fear, the feeling of being trapped in a world where nothing made sense. I was powerless to stop the chaos that surrounded me, just like Sophia. Please, make it stop. I cried out, my voice a fragile whisper lost in the turmoil. The scene shifted again, and I was thrown into a memory that felt both raw and painful. I saw my own parents, their faces twisted in anger as they hurled words that cut deeper than any physical blow. I felt the tears streaming down my cheeks, the ache in my chest as I tried to make sense of their pain. Why can't you just be happy? My mother shouted, her voice laced with frustration. Why can't you see what you're doing to us? My father retorted, his anger palpable. I felt myself retreating, drowning in a sea of despair. The memories were relentless, each one a reminder of the shadows that had haunted me for so long. I had buried them deep, thinking that time would heal the wounds, but they lingered, festering just below the surface. Face it, the figure urged, its voice piercing through the haze of my anguish. You must confront your own shadows to save her. With a surge of determination, I stepped forward, embracing the memories that had haunted me for so long. I could feel the pain, the heartache, but I also felt the strength that had come from enduring it. I had survived, and that resilience was the key to breaking the cycle. Enough! I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. I won't let this continue. I refused to be trapped by the shadows of the past. As I stood my ground, the memories began to shift again, the darkness receding as light began to filter in. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of liberation as I embraced my truth. With that acceptance, I found myself back in the living room, the figure watching me with a newfound intensity. The air felt lighter, the shadows less oppressive. Now, you can reach her, it said, its voice a mixture of hope and sorrow. Thank you, I whispered, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over me. I will find her and help her break free. With renewed purpose, I turned back to the mirror, ready to face whatever lay beyond. I would uncover the truth for both myself and Sophia, and together, we would find a way to escape the darkness. I stepped through the mirror, the surface rippling around me like water as I crossed the threshold. I emerged into a realm that was an amalgamation of memories, disjointed, fragmented scenes playing out in a swirling mist of emotions. The air was thick with tension, and the atmosphere crackled with energy. I was surrounded by echoes of laughter, whispers of fear, and the palpable sense of longing. It was as if I had entered a dreamscape where the past collided with the present, each moment pressing against me like the weight of an unspoken truth. In the distance, I spotted a figure, Sophia, standing alone in a garden that felt eerily familiar. The vibrant flowers around her wilted, their colors muted, as if the life had been drained from them. I felt an overwhelming urge to run to her, but my feet felt glued to the ground, the remnants of my own fears holding me back. Sophia, I called out, my voice trembling as I took a step forward. She turned, her face a mixture of confusion and hope, and I could see the shadows of despair lurking in her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the very act of speaking could shatter the fragile reality around us. "I'm here to help you," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the tumultuous emotions swirling within me. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to be alone. We can find a way out together." As I moved closer, I could see the fear etched in her features. "But it's dark here. I don't want to stay. I want to go home." "I know," I said gently, my heart aching for her. "But we have to confront the darkness first. We can't run away from it. We have to face it head on. Trust me, I'll be with you." She hesitated for a moment, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But then, she reached out, her small hand trembling as it extended toward me. I took her hand in mine, feeling the warmth of her touch, and together we stepped deeper into the Garden of Shadows. As we walked, the environment began to shift, the beauty of the garden transforming into a dark, twisted version of itself. The flowers became grotesque and wilted, their petals curling inwards as if recoiling from the light. The sky overhead grew dark and oppressive, clouds swirling ominously. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked, her voice a mixture of fear and curiosity. "To the heart of the darkness," I replied, steeling myself against the rising dread. "We need to find the source of the pain that has trapped you here." As we moved forward, the shadows around us thickened, creating a barrier that pressed against us like a living entity. I could feel the weight of my own fears rising to the surface, threatening to consume me once more. But I held on tightly to Sophia's hand, drawing strength from our connection. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the air, reverberating off the walls of darkness surrounding us. I turned, instinctively shielding Sophia as the shadows began to writhe and twist, forming into a monstrous figure. It was a manifestation of fear, dark and menacing, its eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. "You dared to intrude," it snarled, its voice dripping with malice. "This is my domain. You cannot save her." I felt a surge of terror wash over me, but I held my ground. "We will not be afraid. We're here to confront you." The creature laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think you can face me? I am the embodiment of her pain, of your pain. You cannot escape what you fear." With that, the monster lunged forward, shadows stretching out like claws aimed at us. I pulled Sophia close, shielding her as the darkness enveloped us. My heart raced as the weight of my own fears pressed down on me, each claw representing a different aspect of my torment. "Remember who you are," I shouted to Sophia, forcing the words out against the suffocating darkness. "We are stronger together. We can't let it control us." Her grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel her resolve building. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her voice steadying. Together, we faced the creature, standing firm against the onslaught of shadows. I concentrated on the memories I had unearthed, the pain, the sorrow, the resilience. I remembered my journey through the darkness, the acceptance of my past, and the strength I had gained from it. As the creature lunged at us, I raised my free hand, calling forth the light that had begun to flicker within me. "We choose to confront you," I shouted, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. "You have no power over us." The creature recoiled, its form shimmering as the light began to pierce through the darkness. I felt Sophia's energy merging with mine, a brilliant glow igniting between us. The shadows shrank back, the claws dissolving into nothingness as we stood united. You cannot break us. I cried, my voice resonating with newfound strength. We are not defined by our fears. We are defined by our courage. With a final surge of energy, we thrust our hands forward, and the light erupted from us, flooding the darkness. The creature roared, a sound of pure anguish as the shadows shattered, dissipating into the air like smoke. As the darkness faded, the garden transformed once more, blooming with vibrant colors and warmth. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers, and the once wilted petals stood tall, vibrant, and alive. Sophia's eyes widened in awe as she took in the beauty around us. "Is it over?" she asked, hope flickering in her gaze. "Yes," I replied, my heart swelling with relief. "We did it. You're free now." We stood together in the heart of the garden, a sense of peace enveloping us as the remnants of darkness faded away. I felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of my past, and I could see the same transformation reflected in Sophia's eyes. "Thank you for saving me," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I was so scared." "You're brave, Sophia," I replied, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "You faced your fears, and that takes incredible strength." As we embraced, I felt a surge of warmth spread through me. The shadows had been vanquished, and with them, the weight of our shared pain. Together, we had confronted the darkness, and in that moment, I knew we were both free to move forward. But as I released her, a shadow flickered at the edge of the garden, a reminder that the remnants of the past lingered. The figure emerged, watching us with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "You have done well," it said, its voice a gentle whisper. "But there are still truths to confront, still shadows that must be faced." I nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over me. "I understand. I will continue this journey, not just for myself, but for those still trapped in their darkness." The figure smiled, a glimmer of hope in its eyes. "Then you are ready for the final confrontation. The journey is not yet over, but you are stronger now. Remember that." I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face as I turned back to Sophia. Together, we stood at the edge of the garden, ready to face whatever lay beyond. As we stepped out of the garden, a palpable sense of change enveloped us. The light seemed brighter, the air fresher. I glanced at Sophia, who walked beside me, her eyes wide with wonder and determination. We were no longer merely survivors of our pasts. We were warriors, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, swirling with uncertainty. I felt a flicker of doubt, but I pushed it aside. With each step, I remembered the shadows we had faced together, the strength we had uncovered. We would not falter now. As we journeyed deeper, the mist thickened, wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. I could hear whispers in the distance, echoes of fears and regrets, taunting us as we pressed forward. "You can't escape," they hissed, the voices growing louder, merging into a cacophony of despair. "Sophia," I said, squeezing her hand to reassure her. "Remember what we faced. We are stronger than this." Together, she affirmed, her voice steady. "We can do this." In the midst of the swirling fog, a figure began to materialize, dark and menacing. It towered over us, a grotesque shadow with eyes like burning coals. This was the embodiment of everything we had fought against, our deepest fears, the pain we had buried, the regrets that haunted us. "You think you can confront me?" It sneered, its voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. "You are nothing but a child playing with shadows." "I am not afraid of you," I shouted back, drawing strength from Sophia's presence. "We know the truth now. You have no power over us." The creature roared, a sound that resonated through the air, shaking the ground beneath us. "You think you can defeat me? I am the darkness that resides in your heart, the pain you refuse to acknowledge." As it lunged at us, I felt a surge of fear, but I clung to Sophia's hand tighter, grounding myself in the reality of our shared journey. "Face it," I urged, my voice steady. "Face the truth of who you are." In that moment, something shifted within me. I began to see the creature not just as a monster, but as a reflection of my own pain, the darkness I had carried for so long. I realized that to defeat it, I had to embrace every part of my past, every wound that had shaped me. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, ready to confront the embodiment of my fears. "I acknowledge you," I said, my voice strong and unwavering. "You are a part of me, but you do not define me." The creature hesitated, its form flickering as if unsure how to respond. "You think mere acceptance will free you?" it snarled, the darkness swirling around it like a tempest. "Yes," I affirmed, my heart pounding in my chest. "I accept my pain, my fears, and my regrets. They are part of my story, but they do not control my future." As I spoke those words, I felt a warmth rising within me, a light that began to shine through the darkness. I turned to Sophia, her eyes filled with understanding. "We're in this together. We can't be alone in our fears." Together, we stepped toward the creature, our combined light pushing against the shadows. "We are stronger together," we shouted in unison, our voices echoing through the air. The creature roared in fury, but the light surged forward, illuminating the darkness that had consumed it. I could feel the weight of my past lifting, the shadows dissipating as we stood united in our truth. "Enough," I declared, the power of acceptance coursing through me. "You are not our enemy. You are a part of our journey, and we choose to rise above you." As the light engulfed the creature, its form began to unravel, the darkness melting away like fog in the morning sun. I could see its eyes flicker with confusion, then clarity, as it faded into the light. "No," it whispered, its voice barely a breath. "This can't be." But it was too late. The light consumed the last remnants of its form, and with a final, echoing cry, the darkness dissipated, leaving behind a serene calm. In the aftermath, the mist cleared, revealing a bright, open landscape, a world filled with colors and light. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me, the burdens of the past lifted. Sophia looked around in wonder, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice a soft melody in the silence. "Yes," I replied, tears of relief streaming down my cheeks. "We did it. We faced our fears, and we emerged stronger." As we embraced, I felt a deep connection with her, a bond forged through our shared struggle. We had traversed the darkest corners of our minds, and together, we had found the light. But as I pulled away, I saw the figure from before, standing at the edge of the landscape, a gentle smile gracing its face. "You have done well," it said, its voice warm and soothing. "But remember, the journey doesn't end here. There will always be shadows, but you now know how to face them." "I will," I promised, a sense of determination flooding through me. "I won't forget the strength we found together." With one last glance at the figure, I turned back to Sophia, our paths now intertwined. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the journey ahead was just beginning. Together, we stepped forward into the light, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing that we would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Old stairs. I often find myself standing at the edge of shadows, pondering the inexplicable. It was a chilly autumn morning when I first learned of the old building on the outskirts of town. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, as if uttering its name would summon something dark and malevolent. I felt an unsettling thrill every time I heard the stories, tales of whispering winds and footsteps echoing in empty halls. But curiosity always outweighed caution. The building was a relic from a bygone era, its facade crumbling and overgrown with ivy. I gathered my closest friends, Sam and Laura, both avid explorers with an unquenchable thirst for adventure. Together, we ventured into the heart of that structure, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten memories. The doors creaked ominously as we pushed them open, revealing a dimly lit foyer, its walls adorned with peeling wallpaper and faded portraits of somber figures. "Are you sure about this?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I replied, though my own heart raced with uncertainty. What's the worst that could happen? As we stepped inside, a cold draft seemed to sweep through the room, causing the hair on my arms to stand on end. The atmosphere was thick with an eerie tension, and the weight of countless stories whispered in the corners. I glanced at the grand staircase that spiraled upward, its worn steps beckoning us to explore. "Let's check upstairs first," Sam suggested, ever the daring one. I hesitated but nodded, driven by an insatiable need to uncover the secrets hidden within the building's walls. We climbed the stairs, each creak echoing like a warning. The second floor was shrouded in shadows, with doors lining the corridor, each leading to rooms that felt trapped in time. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light filtering through grimy windows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. As I stepped into one of the rooms, I was struck by the sight of a broken mirror leaning against the wall. "Hey, look at this," I called out to my friends. The mirror was shattered, fragments reflecting distorted images of our faces, twisted and grotesque. "What a mess," Laura remarked, stepping closer. "Why would anyone leave something like this behind?" Just as I was about to respond, I felt a sudden chill creep up my spine. It was as if the air had shifted, thickening with an unnameable presence. I turned to look down the hallway, but it was empty, the shadows seeming to stretch and curl like fingers. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. "Feel what?" Sam replied, frowning. "That heaviness," I said, glancing back at the mirror. "Like something is watching us." Laura shrugged, though I could see the unease flickering in her eyes. "It's just an old building, nothing more," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We continued exploring, moving deeper into the labyrinth of rooms, but the strange sensation clung to me. With each step, I could hear whispers, soft and unintelligible, weaving through the silence. It was as though the building itself was alive, breathing with memories long buried. Suddenly, I spotted a narrow staircase tucked away behind a door that had been partially ajar. The stairs seemed to descend into darkness, a stark contrast to the dim light of the upper floors. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of dread and excitement surging through me. "Guys, check this out," I said, gesturing for them to follow. They exchanged uncertain glances, but soon obliged, curiosity getting the better of their apprehension. As we descended, the air grew colder, a palpable chill enveloping us. The darkness was thick, wrapping around us like a shroud. I reached for my phone to illuminate our path, the light casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. "Do you think this leads to the basement?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my own trepidation growing. "But we have to see where it goes." We reached the bottom of the staircase, and my heart dropped as I stepped into the room. It was vast and empty, the walls lined with shelves filled with dust-covered boxes. But what drew my attention was the far wall. There, nestled in the shadows, was a door. "What's behind that door?" Sam asked, his eyes wide with intrigue. "I guess we're about to find out," I replied, the thrill of discovery coursing through me. As I approached the door, an unsettling sensation washed over me. The air felt electric, charged with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I turned the doorknob slowly, the metal cold against my palm. And then it happened. The door creaked open, revealing a space that defied reality, a swirling void of colors and lights that shifted and morphed in ways I couldn't comprehend. "What in the world?" Laura breathed, stepping back as if the very sight was a threat. Before I could respond, the room began to tremble, the shadows around us twisting and curling as if alive. Panic surged within me, and I instinctively took a step back. "Maybe we should go back," Sam said, his voice laced with fear. But my gaze was fixed on the swirling portal before us. It felt like an invitation, a beckoning into the unknown, and I couldn't tear myself away from it. As I stood there, frozen in place, I felt the weight of my friends' eyes on me, their fear palpable. It was then I realized that whatever lay beyond that door was not just a passageway to another place, it was a threshold into something far more sinister. Panic swirled around us like the colors in that mesmerizing void. Sam tugged at my arm, his grip tight. "We need to leave. Now." But the draw of the space was overwhelming. It felt as if the air was alive with whispers, urging me to step closer. I hesitated, my heart racing, caught between curiosity and dread. The door trembled on its hinges, the energy radiating from the opening intensifying. "Don't be stupid," Laura said, her voice shaking as she grabbed my other arm. "This isn't right. We need to go back." With a deep breath, I tore my gaze away from the swirling portal. The reality of our situation began to sink in. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker. I stepped back, moving away from the door, and it was as if a fog began to lift. "Let's get out of here," I said, a tremor in my voice. We turned to leave, but as we retraced our steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The chill in the air grew heavier, pressing down on us like a weight we couldn't escape. My breath quickened as I led the way up the stairs, the path back feeling longer and more treacherous with each step. As we reached the second floor, a loud crash echoed through the building, shaking the very foundation beneath us. We froze, the sound reverberating through the hall like a warning. "What was that?" Sam exclaimed, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, dread pooling in my stomach. "We should keep moving." We hurried through the dimly lit corridor, glancing over our shoulders. Shadows flitted just out of our line of sight, teasing the edges of our vision. The world around us felt unstable, shifting like the air before a storm. Finally, we reached the grand staircase again, and I felt a surge of relief as I stepped onto the warm wood. But just as we began to descend, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror hanging in the foyer, a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong. "Did you see that?" I asked, stopping mid-step. "What?" Laura asked, glancing back at me. "There was something in the mirror," I said, my heart pounding. "Let's just get out of here," Sam urged, his voice strained. Reluctantly, I tore my gaze from the mirror and continued down the stairs, the echoes of our hurried footsteps filling the silence. Each step felt like a countdown, a race against whatever dark force was lurking in the building. As we reached the front door, I could feel my pulse quickening, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged as I struggled, pulling with all my strength. "Come on," I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. Sam and Laura rushed to help, pushing against the heavy door. It finally creaked open, and we stumbled out into the daylight, the warm sun feeling like a balm against the chill that had enveloped us. We stood on the porch, gasping for breath, the weight of the building still heavy on our shoulders. I looked back at the old structure, its windows dark and foreboding, as if it were watching us leave. "Let's never come back here again," Laura said, her voice trembling. "Agreed," Sam replied, glancing nervously over his shoulder. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out, that the darkness of that place had seeped into our souls. But curiosity nagged at me like a persistent itch. What lay behind that door? What had we stumbled upon? I pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the reality of the moment. We were safe, at least for now. We headed to a nearby cafe, the familiar surroundings offering a sense of normalcy. But as we settled into our seats, the sense of unease clung to me like a shadow. The whispers from the building echoed in my mind, an unending chant that warned of dangers yet to come. "Let's not talk about it," Laura said, as if reading my thoughts. "Just forget about it." But I knew I couldn't. The images of that swirling portal, the whispers that called out to me, were etched into my memory. I felt a strange mixture of fear and longing, an inexplicable urge to return, to explore further. As we sat in silence, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. I was beginning to realize that the true horror of that building was not just what we had encountered, but what we had left behind. The days that followed were a blur of normalcy, yet a gnawing discomfort lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and routine, but the whispers from the old building echoed relentlessly. I found myself drawn to the memory of that door, the void that lay beyond it, a dark curiosity that simmered beneath the surface. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a pull to return. I could almost hear the echo of my heartbeats as I replayed that moment in my head, the portal swirling with colors and shadows. Each recollection brought with it a mix of fear and a strange exhilaration, like the thrill of standing at the edge of a great unknown. After a week, the weight of my thoughts became unbearable. I called Sam and Laura, suggesting we meet at the cafe again. Their faces tightened at the mention of the building, and I felt a flicker of guilt for dragging them back into that memory. "I don't think we should go back," Laura said, her voice firm. "It was unsettling, and I've had nightmares since we left." "I know, but what if there's more to it?" I pressed, leaning forward, desperation seeping into my tone. "What if that door leads to something we can understand? We can't just leave it like this." Sam exchanged glances with Laura, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I've thought about it too," he admitted slowly. "But we have to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." "Exactly. We should go back and explore the other rooms. There might be clues about what that space is," I urged, my excitement overshadowing my fear. After a long pause, Sam finally nodded. "Okay, but we stick together. No wandering off." Laura sighed, her expression torn. "Fine, but I'm not going down those stairs again." With our minds made up, we planned our return for that weekend. The anticipation buzzed through me like electricity, but it was laced with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. When the day arrived, the sun shone brightly, illuminating our path as we made our way to the old building. It looked even more foreboding in the daylight, its windows dark and vacant. As we approached the door, I felt the weight of history pressing down on us, the air thick with unspoken secrets. Are we really doing this? Laura asked, her voice wavering. Yes, we are, I said, trying to sound confident even as my stomach twisted with apprehension. The door creaked open with the same ominous groan as before, and we stepped inside. The air was cool and stale, a stark contrast to the warmth outside. Shadows danced along the walls, and the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. As we moved through the foyer, I could feel the building's pulse, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat. It felt alive, as if it were aware of our presence, watching us closely. Let's head upstairs first, I suggested, the thrill of discovery propelling me forward. Climbing the stairs again, I felt an electric tension in the air. Each step brought back memories of our last visit, the whispers, the chilling sensations. The shadows felt thicker this time, as if they were closing in around us. We reached the second floor, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding wash over me. We need to check out that mirror again, I said, pointing toward the room where we had first seen it. I don't like this, Laura muttered, but she followed behind, her anxiety palpable. As we entered the room, I was struck by how much it felt unchanged. The shattered mirror still leaned against the wall, fragments reflecting distorted images of our faces. I stepped closer, captivated by the twisted reflections. Look at this, I said, gesturing to the shards. But as I gazed into the broken glass, I felt a flicker of movement behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, shadows stretching like fingers along the walls. Did you see that? I asked, heart racing. See what? Sam replied, confusion creasing his brow. I thought I saw something behind us. Laura shivered, glancing around nervously. Can we just get out of this room? I nodded, shaking off the unease. Let's keep moving. We left the room and wandered down the corridor, opening doors and peering into the darkened spaces beyond. Each room told a story of neglect, filled with dust and forgotten relics, but there was nothing that felt inherently dangerous, nothing except the growing tension in the air. As we made our way to the end of the hallway, I felt a pull toward the door that led to the spiral staircase. We need to see what's down there, I urged, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. No way, Laura said, shaking her head. We already know what's down there. We don't need to go back. But we can't ignore it, I insisted. It's part of this place. What if it holds the key to understanding what we felt? Reluctantly, Sam nodded. Okay, but we stay together, and if anything feels off, we turn back. With a sense of foreboding, we approached the staircase. The air grew colder as we descended, the darkness wrapping around us like a cloak. I switched on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the narrow steps as we made our way down. As we reached the bottom, the familiar chill settled in, and I glanced around the vast, empty room. It felt like a different world down here, the shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. Let's check the shelves, Sam suggested, pointing to the dust-covered boxes that lined the walls. We began to sift through the boxes, each one filled with old papers, trinkets, and forgotten items. But nothing seemed to provide any answers, only more questions. As we rummaged through the clutter, I felt a strange sense of being watched, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Did you feel that? I whispered, glancing over my shoulder. What? Laura asked, her eyes wide with fear. That sensation, like we're not alone. Before anyone could respond, the room trembled violently, the walls vibrating as a deafening roar echoed through the air. We stumbled backward, fear clawing at our throats as the ground shook beneath us. "What is happening?" Laura screamed, her voice swallowed by the chaos. "I don't know," I shouted, struggling to keep my balance. The shelves rattled, boxes toppling over and spilling their contents across the floor. The very air felt electric, alive with an energy that sent chills racing down my spine. Then, in an instant, the noise ceased and an eerie silence enveloped us. "What just happened?" Sam panted, eyes darting around the room. I don't know. "But we need to get out of here," I said, heart pounding in my chest. We turned to flee, but as we reached the staircase, the shadows coiled around us, stretching and writhing as if alive. I felt a cold hand grasp my wrist, pulling me back. "Help!" I shouted, panic surging within me. "Hold on!" Sam cried, lunging for me. But the shadows tightened their grip, and as I struggled to break free, I felt a rush of darkness enveloping me, dragging me into the abyss. The darkness swallowed me whole, a void so deep it felt like I was suspended in time. I could hear faint echoes of Sam and Laura's voices, distant and muffled, fighting against the overwhelming silence. The cold gripped me tighter, seeping into my bones as I struggled against the unseen force pulling me deeper into the abyss. "Let go!" I screamed, my voice swallowed by the shadows. Panic surged through me, and with every ounce of strength I had left, I fought back, trying to break free from the icy grasp. Suddenly, I felt the pressure release, and I was hurled backward, crashing onto the cold floor of the room. Gasping for air, I blinked against the dim light that flickered around me. "Are you okay?" Sam's voice broke through the haze, and I turned to see him and Laura rushing to my side. I think so," I stammered, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange energy. As I pushed myself up, I caught sight of the shadows retreating, slinking back into the corners of the room. It was as if they had been driven away by our presence. "What was that?" Laura breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I replied, my heart still racing. "But we need to get out of here. Now." We scrambled to our feet, the urgency of the moment propelling us forward. I felt a strong compulsion to flee, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the basement. As we rushed toward the staircase, the shadows shifted again, coiling and swirling as if they were alive. I turned to look over my shoulder, a chill racing down my spine as I saw a figure emerge from the darkness. It was fleeting, just a flash, a silhouette that melted into the shadows as quickly as it appeared. "Did you see that?" I gasped, my voice trembling. "What?" Sam asked, glancing back. "I thought I saw something, someone." "Let's not stick around to find out," Laura urged, fear driving her voice. With that, we rushed up the spiral staircase, the shadows retreating as we ascended. As we reached the top, the air felt lighter, but the tension still hung thick. We emerged into the hallway, and I glanced back down the stairs, the feeling of being watched gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the sensation that something sinister lurked in that basement, waiting for us to return. "What do we do now?" Sam asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We can't leave without understanding what happened," I insisted, despite my own fear. "We need to explore the other rooms on this floor." Reluctantly, they nodded, and we began moving down the corridor. As we opened each door, I felt the weight of history bearing down on us, the air thick with memories of a time long past. In one room, we found a dusty old journal resting on a table. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed and brittle. I carefully opened it, revealing scrawled handwriting that spoke of the building's history. "This place used to be a hospital," I read aloud. "Patients were kept in isolation, and many of them went missing. No one knew what happened to them." Laura's face paled. "That's not good." I continued reading, captivated by the words. Some spoke of strange occurrences, of shadows that moved on their own, whispers that filled the halls. What if those shadows are connected to what happened to the patients? Sam interjected, his brow furrowed. "It makes sense," I replied, a sense of dread creeping in. What if the building is a vessel for their pain? For their suffering? "Then we shouldn't be here," Laura said, her voice trembling. "We need to leave. Now." Just as she finished speaking, a loud bang echoed through the corridor, making us jump. The sound reverberated off the walls, and the lights flickered. "What was that?" Sam asked, his eyes wide. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing again. Suddenly, I felt the temperature drop, the air turning icy. I glanced around, the shadows creeping closer, thickening like a fog. A sense of foreboding settled over us, and I could feel my instincts screaming at me to run. "We have to go," I shouted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We bolted down the hallway, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the stillness. As we turned the corner, I glanced back, the shadows writhing like serpents in the dim light. "Keep moving," Laura urged, and we sprinted toward the staircase. Just as we reached the top, a deafening crash shook the building, causing the walls to tremble. I glanced over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold as I saw the dark figure from before, looming at the end of the corridor, watching us with hollow eyes. "Run!" I screamed, and we lunged down the staircase, fear propelling us forward. We burst into the foyer, the heavy front door looming before us like a portal to safety. But as we reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. "Come on!" I yelled, panic rising. "It's stuck!" Sam cried, pulling with all his strength. "Help me!" I shouted, grabbing the other side of the door. As we struggled against the door, the air thickened, and I could feel the presence drawing closer, the shadows creeping up behind us. I glanced back, and the figure was there again, closer this time, a darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolence. "Go!" I shouted, pushing with all my might. With one final shove, the door swung open, and we stumbled out into the daylight, gasping for breath. The sun was bright and blinding, a stark contrast to the darkness that lurked inside. "We need to get away from this place," Laura panted, glancing back nervously. I nodded, my heart still racing as we ran down the path. But as we reached the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't escaped. The shadows seemed to follow us, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment we might return. The three of us collapsed onto a nearby park bench, gasping for breath. The sun was a warm embrace against the cold grip of fear that still lingered in my chest. I looked at Sam and Laura, their faces pale and drawn. "What the hell just happened?" Laura asked, her voice trembling as she ran her hands through her hair. "I wish I knew," I replied, still shaken. "But whatever is in that building, it's not just a memory. It feels alive, like it's watching us." "Maybe we shouldn't have gone back," Sam murmured, his expression a mix of fear and regret. "That place is dangerous." "I know, but we can't just forget about it," I insisted. "Those shadows, they might be tied to something more, something that needs to be uncovered." Laura looked at me, her eyes wide with concern. "What if we're not meant to uncover it? What if some things are better left alone?" For a moment, I hesitated, doubt creeping into my mind. But what if we're the only ones who can understand? What if we're meant to figure it out? Sam's brow furrowed. I don't want to end up like those patients. Whatever they experienced, it's still here, and it wants something from us. I shuddered at the thought, the images of the shadows and the ominous figure flashing in my mind. Then we need to prepare ourselves. We can't just give up. After a moment of silence, Laura sighed. Fine. But if we're going back, we do it right. We gather more information, something that can help us understand what we're dealing with. Agreed, I said, relief flooding through me. We can do some research on the building's history, the hospital, and its patients. We need to know what we're up against. We spent the next few days poring over old records and online archives. It turned out the building had a long and troubled history. Patients had disappeared, some reportedly escaping into the woods behind the property, never to be seen again. Each story we uncovered painted a picture of a place steeped in darkness, where suffering and despair had been allowed to flourish. As we pieced together the narratives, the shadows from the building took on a new meaning. These were not just echoes of the past, they were manifestations of the pain that had been inflicted within those walls. There's something about the woods, I said one evening, staring at a faded photograph of the hospital grounds. It's where a lot of the patients were last seen. They must have found something out there, something they were trying to escape. Maybe that's where we need to go, Sam suggested hesitantly. No way, Laura said quickly, shaking her head. We can't go back to that place, especially not into the woods. We have to. If the answers are out there, we can't just ignore it, I insisted, my determination unwavering. We need to confront this head on. After much discussion, we reluctantly agreed to explore the woods behind the building. With flashlights and supplies in hand, we drove back to the old hospital, our hearts pounding as we approached the ominous structure once more. The building loomed above us, a shadow against the moonlit sky, and the air felt charged with anticipation. I could see Laura shivering beside me, her fear palpable. Let's just get this over with, she muttered, glancing back at the car as if it were a lifeline. We stepped into the building, the familiar chill wrapping around us like a shroud. As we moved through the darkened corridors, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on us, the whispers of the past echoing in the silence. This way, I said, leading the way to the back door that led outside. The door creaked open, revealing the dark woods beyond. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. A cold wind rustled through the leaves, sending a shiver down my spine. We stepped into the shadows of the forest, the path ahead barely illuminated by our flashlights. The air felt heavy, thick with an unsettling energy that made every step feel like a leap into the unknown. As we ventured deeper, the trees closed in around us, their gnarled roots twisting like grasping hands. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our footsteps crunching against the fallen leaves. Do you hear that? Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. Hear what? Sam asked, glancing around nervously. It sounds like whispering. I strained to listen, and sure enough, there was a faint murmur in the air, like voices carried on the wind. It sent chills racing down my spine, the shadows seeming to deepen around us. Let's keep moving, I said, my heart racing. As we walked, I noticed a clearing up ahead, the moonlight illuminating a small patch of ground. There. Let's check it out. We stepped into the clearing, and I could see remnants of what looked like old campfires, the ashes still dark and cold. It felt like a place where people had gathered, but the air was thick with tension. This feels wrong, Laura murmured, looking around. We shouldn't be here. Before I could respond, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, causing the branches to sway violently. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us like a chorus of unseen voices. What is happening? Sam shouted, panic rising in his voice. Back to the building. Now! I yelled, feeling the pressure of the shadows closing in around us. We turned to flee, but as we rushed back into the woods, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the clearing, dark shapes shifting in the shadows, watching us with hollow eyes. Run! I shouted, adrenaline fueling my escape as we sprinted through the trees. Branches whipped against my skin, and I could hear the frantic footsteps of my friends behind me. The shadows seemed to follow, stretching out like tendrils eager to ensnare us. Just as we reached the edge of the woods, I felt a cold grip on my ankle, pulling me down. I cried out, struggling to break free, but the shadows were relentless. Help! I screamed, panic surging as I fought against the darkness. Sam and Laura turned, their faces etched with horror. Grab her! Laura shouted, reaching for me. With a surge of strength, they pulled me free, and we stumbled into the open space beyond the woods. But as we turned back, the shadows receded, melting into the darkness of the trees, their whispers fading into the night. Breathless and shaken, we stood at the edge of the woods, the old hospital looming behind us. What the hell was that? Sam gasped, his voice shaking. I don't know, I replied, my heart racing. But we can't go back in there. Not again. As we made our way to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had followed us from the woods was still lurking nearby, waiting for its chance to strike. We drove away from the hospital, the old building shrinking in the rearview mirror, yet the shadows felt like they were clinging to us, refusing to let go. The whispers lingered in my mind, a haunting echo that refused to fade, filling the silence of the car with an oppressive weight. Laura sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her expression vacant. Sam gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if expecting the shadows to appear at any moment. We need to talk about what happened, I said, breaking the heavy silence. I don't want to talk about it, Laura replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But we can't just pretend it didn't happen, I pressed. Something is very wrong, and we need to figure it out before it's too late. Too late for what? Sam asked, his voice tinged with frustration. What are we even dealing with? I glanced out the window, my mind racing. Those shadows, they're tied to the history of the building. We felt them, and they're angry. Whatever pain the patients went through is still here, and it wants to be known. We should go to the authorities, Laura suggested, her voice shaking. They need to know what's happening. People are still disappearing. I doubt they believe us, Sam replied. They'll think we're just kids looking for thrills. What if we document everything? We can gather evidence, video recordings, photographs, I proposed. We can't let this go. Not when we know something sinister is at play. After a long pause, Laura finally nodded. Fine. But we do it in the daylight. I can't handle going back in there at night. We agreed to meet the next day, determined to gather what we could. But as I lay in bed that night, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the house felt amplified, shadows lurking in the corners of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me, just beyond the threshold of consciousness. When morning finally came, I felt the weight of dread still hanging over me. I met Sam and Laura at the coffee shop, and the three of us huddled together over steaming cups, discussing our plan. "I think we should start by filming around the building," I said, my voice steady. "If we catch anything on tape, it'll be our proof." "What if we encounter the shadows again?" Laura asked, her eyes wide with fear. "We won't," I reassured her, though doubt gnawed at me. "We'll stick together, and we'll be ready." As we finished our drinks, a sense of determination began to build within me. I knew we had to confront whatever waited in the shadows. Once we arrived at the hospital, the sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the grounds. I felt a mix of fear and resolve as we stepped out of the car. We grabbed our cameras and flashlights, and I led the way back toward the entrance, each step echoing in the stillness. The air felt charged, like the calm before a storm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's start outside," I suggested, scanning the area for any signs of movement. As we moved around the building, I focused the camera on the windows, capturing the decay of the once grand structure. Each frame felt like a piece of history, a testament to the lives that had been lost within those walls. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from inside, making us jump. The sound reverberated through the air, and I exchanged nervous glances with Sam and Laura. "What was that?" Laura whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "Let's check it out." With our flashlights illuminating the path, we crept toward the entrance, the door creaking ominously as we pushed it open. The smell of mildew and decay assaulted my senses, and I felt the familiar chill enveloping us. "Keep the cameras rolling," I instructed, trying to steady my trembling hands. We moved cautiously through the dark corridors, the air thick with anticipation. The shadows danced along the walls, and the whispers began again, soft at first, then growing louder. As we reached the center of the building, we spotted the source of the noise. A fallen piece of debris had crashed to the floor, scattering dust and debris everywhere. "What a mess," Sam muttered, glancing around uneasily. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, sending shivers down my spine. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Laura replied, her face pale. "It feels like something's here." I could feel the tension in the air, the whispers swirling around us. "We need to keep moving," I urged, my instincts screaming at me to flee. Just as we turned to leave, a shadow darted past the doorway, barely visible in the dim light. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "What was that?" I whispered, fear gripping me. "I don't know," Sam replied, his voice shaking. "Let's go," Laura said urgently, glancing back down the hallway. We turned and fled, the shadows flickering in our peripheral vision. As we reached the entrance, I felt a presence behind us, something dark and suffocating, pressing against our backs. "Run!" I screamed, bursting through the door and out into the daylight. We stumbled into the open, gasping for air, the shadows receding as we crossed the threshold. I looked back at the building, feeling a mix of relief and dread. "Did you see it?" I asked breathlessly, my heart racing. "I saw something," Sam said, his voice strained. "It was just there." Laura shook her head, her eyes wide. "I can't take this anymore. We have to leave." As we turned to walk away, a low growl echoed from inside the building, a deep, rumbling sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "What was that?" I whispered, fear rising in my throat. "I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out," Sam said, and we sprinted toward the car. We reached the vehicle, fumbling with the door handles as panic surged through us. I glanced back at the hospital one last time, the shadows swirling like a tempest within. As we sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, the presence of the shadows lingering just beyond the edge of reality. The car hung beneath us as we drove in silence, the weight of our experience hanging heavily in the air. The darkness had followed us, and though we had escaped the building, I knew it wasn't over. "What do we do now?" Laura finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. I swallowed hard, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. We prepare ourselves. This isn't just about us anymore. We have to find a way to stop it. As we drove into the setting sun, the shadows stretched long behind us, and I knew we were on the brink of something far darker than we could ever imagine. But deep down, I understood that this was just the beginning. The old stairs still held their secrets, and one way or another, we would have to face them again. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.